An incurably ill mother, a cruel father, and a spoiled younger sister doom the family to a tragic end. Reincarnated hero Lid Bardia chose to live honestly. Changing the future is also his goal. After a long day at the computer, Candace stretches, relieved to finally have a break. She approached the hero and asked how he liked the Automi game she had recommended a few days earlier. The hero found it fascinating. The mechanics proved more engaging than he expected. He especially liked the free mode, which lets you write the heroine's story from scratch. The girl is glad he liked it, but Kanda says his long stories don't prove he really went through all that, and Ichi, 33, is an ordinary office worker who loves games and anime. The company pays for overtime and lets you take days off. It was nothing special, but he was content with that life. Other employees often go out drinking with business partners, while the hero spends his nights playing games. His body had reached its limits before he noticed. The last thing he remembered was his mother's figure, who had died several years earlier. The boy's eyes opened. Confused, he doesn't know where he is, looking at an unfamiliar ceiling, and seems to have lost consciousness while waiting for a traffic light. He realized his arms and legs were too short. Rushing to the mirror, he stared at his reflection. The hero couldn't tell who was standing in front of him. A maid rushed into the room, surprised to see Mr. Lid awake, and hurried to tell everyone. The man says the child is fine. They were very scared when he lost consciousness in the garden. Lid didn't understand who any of these people were. It turned out the man was the child's servant named Garn, and the hero apologized to the servants for worrying them. The maids looked surprised. The boy didn't understand his own words. Garn thanked his master for saying that. To them, that was too much praise. He told the boy to call him just Garn. The young man thanked the servant. Sudden pain hit his head. He couldn't tell what was happening. Pieces of memory surfaced. It contains someone's memories, so everyone thinks he's just ordinary Kanda, and Ikai, a company employee, believes he's that man, until he realizes he's not Kanda and is actually Lead Bardia. A supporting character to Lead Bardia in the game Odom Game Toki Rella, which she played, he must help the villain who is interfering with the main character. Reborn into the world of an Atom game, he wasn't just an evil side character. Lid rang the bell to summon a maid. He needed to know what was happening. It meant disturbing the servants. A maid entered the room and asked what had happened. Lid told her there was no need to bow. He was just checking. The boy guessed he'd be 7 this year, but the girl said he'd only turned 6 last month. He asked me to describe his country and family, the Magnolia Empire, a land where beastmen, dark elves, and other races live. Nobility includes neutrals, conservatives, and reformers, and the Bardi family is mostly neutral, with Lanner Bardi and his wife Nenali living with their younger daughter Meldy, and he sometimes goes to the city to handle political matters. Everything is just the same as in the world of Tokirel. The girl asked if the master was all right. Lid confirmed it and told her not to worry, but from her expression he thought she was afraid of him. A sudden headache hit him, and memories about his attitude toward the servants surfaced. He used to be capricious and everyone feared him. Lidpak apologized to the girl for how he treated her before, then asked her name and complimented her. Danae called the boy cute, then apologized. The next morning, Tenny wakes the young master. He sprang up, his face flushing. The girl asked what had happened. He replied that nothing had happened, though he couldn't bring himself to say he'd fallen in love with her outfit. Danae offered to help him change, but he insisted he could do it himself. Lid sat at the large dining room table, amazed by the aristocratic life. For some reason he was alone at the table, so he asked Grand where the others were. Grand said Mr. Liner was in town, and Mrs. Nenali was feeling unwell in her room. Liz decided to go check on his mother. Nenali Bardia is his mother. In the game she didn't even have a name, and he wonders what kind of character she is. He walked to the door of his mother's room. Denise suggested they come another day because the woman wasn't feeling well, but the young man disagreed, saying he hadn't seen his mother in a while. Lid doesn't understand why he seems forbidden from entering, as if his body and heart are stopping him. Dane explained that Mistress Nenali wasn't feeling well, so the boy was trying to avoid meeting her. He knocked and went into his mother's room. His mother sat on the bed and said she was glad Lid had come. A wave of incomprehensible feelings washed over the hero. He couldn't tell what it was. Nanny said she was fine, then began coughing. Lid rushed to his mother. He helped her sit up. The woman told him she had heard from Garn that he had lost consciousness in the garden. She asked if he was really all right. The hero said he was fine and glad to see her. Mom apologized for worrying him. Lid shook his head and said there was nothing to worry about because he was the Margrave, his father's son. They talked a little longer, and the young man left, promising to return. To find out what was wrong with Mrs. Nenali, Lid went to Garn. The servant said he could not tell him that. Lid insisted he was serious. Lid would not stop asking. Garen told the boy this must stay secret between them. Lady Nainali was suffering from magical exhaustion. The man should not have told him. Every person in this world has at least a small amount of life energy called magic power. Normally when it occurs, it heals on its own, but with magical exhaustion, natural recovery is sharply weakened and the person dies, and a disease with no cure is called fatal. The hero suspected it was the disease Garn mentioned, because Takarol had a debuff called magic exhaustion that gradually drained a character's mana, and when the mana hit 0, caused their health to start falling. In the doorway stood a little girl, Meldy's younger sister. The girl asked what her brother was doing. He said he needed to find something and offered to help. Meldy asked if he would be angry. The hero denied it and invited her over, offering to read her a picture book. She agreed and fell into his arms. He asked her to close the door first. Lid read a book about princesses to his sister. The hero's memories began to return. Meldy's birth filled Lid with joy. When his mother fell ill, he was likely trying to protect his sanity like any child, so he lashed out at others, cursing and fighting, and Meldy suffered too. They started avoiding each other, so they stopped having breakfast together. Lid apologized to his sister. She didn't understand why and said he couldn't sleep in the garden. The boy realized she already knew and said, "You shouldn't pretend you don't." She replied she wasn't pretending. The hero said Melody was smart. Meldy told her brother he could call her Mel. Mother always calls her Mel, and he does the same because he is important to her. After reading the book, the girl fell asleep on her brother's shoulder. Lid called an A, and she was touched by the sight. She picked the girl up and carried her into the room. Garn asked if the young man had actually been with Mistress Meldy. He confirmed it and said he had read her books until she fell asleep. The servant thanked the boy and hoped everything would continue well between them. Smiling, Lid said it would be so because she was his sister. Garn saw the young man had changed a lot since he lost consciousness in the garden. The hero defended himself, saying he hadn't changed much. After the servant left, the hero wiped the sweat from his brow and admitted he was afraid, yet he was surprised people compared his current self to his past self. Talking with his sister and mother made him realize what he needed to do. In Tokyoro, Lid is caught in a crime with the antagonist. After his conviction, he was exiled, though he could have been sent to the front or executed. The hero must prevent this. To avoid trial and exile, first befriend the characters and steer clear of actions that could lead to trial, death, or exile. Reading the note, the hero realizes he must have written it himself, though that seems almost impossible. Most characters live in the city or in other countries, so he has little chance of meeting them because he lives in the Margrave's territory and he is a minor character. He must build his strength to survive alone, and to do that he needs to save money. Above all, he wanted to cure his mother. That was likely Lid's feeling when he saw her condition. His beloved mother grew weaker and he could do nothing, so he hid his heartbreak and pain. The hero suggested his family ties had weakened because his mother fell ill, and he needed to restore unity, find a scientific way to avoid being condemned, and follow the law. Kondo remembers his mother's life, final days, and death. He won't go through that again. After collecting every piece of literature he could find, he began searching for information and was determined to save his mother. Lid Bardia is the 6-year-old hero of this world. He is a handsome boy with matching silver hair and violet eyes. He can remember the exact contents of a book he has read and thinks he's a superbrain. While reading the book, he found something interesting. The plants and ores in this world look and are named exactly like those in the real world. Lid now knows what he must do. Garn tells the hero that Mr. Liner has returned. Bardia has returned to Wama. It will be the first time he sees him in person. Garn said the hero wants to speak with him. Standing by the door, the young man hopes it goes well. Entering his father's office, he apologized. After hearing his son faint in the garden, the father asked how he was feeling. The hero said he was already fine. Leonard cut to the chase and asked what he wanted to talk about. Lid sat down and said he had 2 questions for his father. Yes, his father wanted him to have a chance to learn magic, study martial arts, and get an education. Why did the hero remember Lid, who seemed like someone from the game? Training lets him change. That's simply his nature. In free mode, unlocked after completing the game, the lead can learn every type of magic. That can be useful. Starting out, his stats are very weak, and it takes time to level them up. Almost no one is willing to help him, but he got pulled into the grind and managed to use Lid. Liner said he'd been thinking about it for a while, but had put it off after seeing his own state of mind, and asked his son if he was sure about it. Lid found it hard to watch his mother sick, but he realized her suffering had to end and he wanted to help her himself. Smiling, the father said they would find him a teacher and then asked about the second request. The young man wanted money he could spend freely. His father asked what he would use it for. He replied that he had some interesting ideas. He wanted to make them a reality. Lid asked his father for an investment with no paperwork, and the hero saw it as a gamble, but preparing the documents would take too long, so he decided to rely on enthusiasm. His father relented and said he'd give him a certain amount, though it was more than a child should have. He hoped Lid had a plan. Lid jumped up from his chair, confirmed this, and thanked his father. At that point, he said he had one more request. He suggested making a promise with Mel because he was worried they weren't spending enough time together. Liner said he'd think it over and asked if Meldy had actually given him permission to call her that. The hero confirmed she had. The children are sitting around the dinner table. The father asks his daughter if he can call her Mel. She panics. Silence filled the room. Meldy said he couldn't. She allowed only her mother and brother. Father was upset but kept it hidden, and when Lid said he wanted to explore the grounds today, father agreed and told Garn to get the carriage ready. 2 knights will guard the hero, Diana, a girl, and Lubins, a boy. The Bardia area lies far from the city, so it is called the border. It has plenty of empty land for industrial development. Looking at the olive tree, the young man thought growing olives had been his father's idea. Diana said they will arrive soon. The hero thinks they didn't come here for fun. They have things to spend money on in this city. This isn't just a village. It's the largest city in the area. They stepped into the square, and the knights asked the young man to stay close because the city was crowded. Lid agreed. Moments later, they stood beside a building, and Diana asked whether this was the place. He confirmed it, and they entered Christie's Chamber of Commerce, where a girl with cat ears greeted them and offered to recommend something. When Lid said he'd recently sent a letter, the girl realized he was the host's guest and went to confirm it. An elf stepped forward, apologized for keeping them waiting, and introduced herself as Christy Saffron, a representative of the Christie Chamber of Commerce. Christy Saffron is the only elf here. Everything matches Garn's description. The girl led them into the reception area. The elf and the boy traded polite words, and the girl asked whether the hero was sure leaving guards outside the doors was best. Lid agreed and said he wanted everything they talked about to remain secret. He suggested getting to the main point and asked her what she knew about lotion and conditioner. A few days ago, the hero learned that aloe vera exists in this world, asked if aloe vera lotion existed here, and Danae, passing by, asked what aloe vera lotion was. Lid was surprised they did not use it after washing their faces and asked whether they took care of their skin, but the girl did not know what skin care meant. He assumed these things were obvious, but in this world they were unknown. Danae said she had never considered it and wondered how he knew, and the hero said he thought it would be nice if such a thing existed. Aloe grows in their garden. Lid said it can heal wounds. The maid was surprised that such a nasty weed could do that. An olive field, permission, vast land, skincare, luxury, and a new product aimed at aristocrats. That's what it takes. The hero immediately began making samples. At first he tried making a lotion, then asked if they had a quote conditioner and tried making a sample from olives after watching a video to kill time. Christy said this was the first she'd heard of it. She would know if it existed, but for now it was only an idea. The hero rejoiced inwardly. Everything was as he thought. Now something could come of it. Lid pulled out the jars and said he had brought everything, and the girl was surprised he already had samples. Asking to try it, she got the hero's permission and then removed her glove to apply the product to her hand. Moments later, she felt inspired and said things had gotten much better. Having long suffered from dry skin, she said a product like this had seemed impossible, told Mr. Lid it would sell well, and he was delighted she liked it. Chris felt inspired and said they had to turn it into a product. The hero urged her to try the conditioner. After their conversation, they started thinking about their next steps. The hero plans to create personal assets and must find lute grass and moon grass to make a cure for magical exhaustion syndrome. The young man's explanation made Christina uneasy. When she received the letter, she could not believe a child would bring up trade. After leaving the Saffron family's Chamber of Commerce to open her own, she had not expected to listen to the Margrave's son's ravings. Noticing her boss's good mood, Emma said they would soon have a lot of work. Lubins asked whether everything had worked out for the gentleman. Lid said Christie was willing to hear him out. They were now on good terms with the Chamber of Commerce. There was no time to relax. If he stayed idle, a terrible future would await him. There was no time for doubt. He had to earn money and start a new life. Suddenly, he noticed someone. A girl stood looking around. The young man assumed she was lost. Approaching her, he asked if she was okay. She closed up. A young man introduced himself and said he thought she needed help. She said she was lost and couldn't find her guide. Lid asked where they had split up and offered to help her. After a while, they found a guide. The girl thanked the hero for rescuing her mistress. The hero said she didn't need to bow. It was clear the girls needed help. The stranger's face went red. Diana and Lubin's looked surprised. The conductor tells the princess she is glad the princess is okay. Still, the girl says nothing. She could not stop thinking about the boy and said she wished she had learned his name, and the conductor suggested the girl had fallen in love. Meanwhile, Lupin asks Mr. Lit if he's sure he shouldn't have learned the girl's name. The hero did not answer. He slept on Diana's shoulder. Smiling at the situation, they chose to go back to the mansion. The hero learned that Mrs. Sandra, a teacher, had come to see him. The girl introduced herself and said she would teach him magic. Sandra Anust was Lita's magic teacher. They greeted each other. The hero had been waiting for this. Apparently Lid could use many kinds of magic. The girl asked if he had ever used magic. The young man said he had not and had only read about it in books. The teacher says that to use magic you must turn life force into magical energy, and only after that can you use magic, so first you must learn how to make that conversion. It's not so simple, but she'll explain how. The young man can count on her. Lid realized she loved magic by how she acted. Sandra said showing magic in person would be easier and suggested going to the training building. In the center of the room, the girl told the young man to look. At her command, a magic ball fireball appeared. Then she turned to the hero and asked for his opinion. The young gentleman's eyes shone. He was delighted. He rushed over to the girl and told her she had cool magic. Lita's behavior moved her, but she quickly composed herself, remembering she was a teacher. She told him that if he memorized the magical image clearly in his mind, he could use it without a spell, and demonstrated it. They won't learn this right away. First, they need to learn how to use magic. The young man began to act. He failed. Lid doesn't know why. He thinks he lacks talent. Sandra understands he is failing. She offered a tip on transferring magic power and told the hero to try it. He agreed, stepped closer, and she asked him to put his hand in hers. She started channeling magical power into the hero's body. He screamed like he was about to be torn apart. Sandra said it was nothing to worry about. No one had ever been torn apart before. Something seems to be tearing his insides out through his hands, and the young man finds it very strange. The hero feels uncomfortable. The girl asks him to wait a moment, and Lid thinks the girl is doing it on purpose and is just joking. Moments later, Sandra let the boy go and said she was done. Lid thought it was just torture. The teacher apologized to the boy and said she had just forced a transfer of magic power on him. Learning to control magic power on your own takes a lot of practice. If someone else forces him to feel the translation, it will take much less time but hurt a little. He looked at her and thought she should have been told this earlier. Sandra smiled and said talking in advance was not at all interesting. She suggested trying to translate the magical power once more. The hero now felt something stirring inside him. Already he had sensed the source of the magical power. Now the source needed to be translated into magic. Imagine the compression and you will feel something extraordinary. The boy's body suddenly glowed. Sandra smiled, said it was magical power, and told him to channel it into his fists. She tells him to remember the fireball she showed him. To use it, he must form a mental image of the magic, and once he has that image, he must say the magic's name at the target and cast it. Lid focused and gathered his magic into his fists, the way teacher Sandra had shown him, shaping it into a ball and aiming at the target. The hero activated fireball magic, and it worked. The teacher was surprised. Thrilled, Lid ran to the girl, who remained silent. She said she did not expect him to make so much progress with magic in one day. Mastering how to translate magical power doesn't make you familiar with magic right away. You have to work hard to memorize the image. Sandra smiled and said Mr. Lita had a vivid imagination and might be a genius. After creating several more fireballs that all hit the target, the hero tried them without the spell and they still worked. Sandra kept calling Lid a genius. The young man felt unwell. His magic power had weakened. A lecture is up next. Lid must have overdone it. Everyone is born with the same amount of magical power, and the more you use it, the more it grows. A young man asked whether lost magical power could be restored. Only one known method exists. Many countries are trying to develop a potion to restore it. So far, no one has succeeded. Lid realizes these aren't the recovery potions from the game. Teacher Sandra explained magical elements and special kinds of magic. Casting a fireball requires converting magical power into fire and water, and this magic plays the same supporting role as the forced transfer of magical power. She warned that magic isn't that simple. You can even make your own magic. The young man looked surprised. Sandra said the hero was just starting to learn. He needed time to get used to the power of magic. Lid believes he is stronger now. Lubens noticed the gentleman's strange movements and asked what they were, and the young man said it was just a warm-up. Lubens then asked whether the knight exercised at night, and the knight said he ran but did not make such strange movements. The young man knows there is no warm-up in this world. Confusion crossed his face. Knight Lubens had taught him martial arts today. In his past life he had not exercised much, so his confidence was low. Physical activity had to be avoided to change the future. The hero first takes a stance and then swings. Seeing how good he is, Lubens suggests he practice. The knight told the young man he could strike wherever he wanted. The leader rushed into the attack. They're sparring, and the boy doesn't understand what's happening to him. He felt light and enjoyed swinging the wooden sword. The leader's strong physical abilities explain it all. He seems able to do anything. Lubens said that was all for today, and added he could even become better than Mr. Liner. Lidon enjoys praise but has never won, and he wonders if there is anything he can do to make that happen. He asks the knight how long he and Diana have been friends, and the knight says they live near each other and have been friends since childhood. The hero thought he liked her. Lubin blushed and began to defend himself. The boys' faces flushed. They say maids and knights cannot rise in rank because Lubens is a coward who cannot confess his feelings. Knight sank to the floor and drew his nose in. Lid felt he had gone too far. Spotting Diana, Lid called her over. Diana asked what had happened. Lubens sat on the ground, dejected. She said the knight had been a bit odd and that she sometimes became upset over simple things. She asked what the master had told him. Looking away, the hero told Lubens he had been afraid of her, and assuming it had affected her too, felt a strange unease. Angry, Diana said she would get every detail from him. The girl struck her friend on the head. Lubens asked her what she was doing there. She asked if they had finished training, and the knight confirmed it. She said she needed to speak with Mr. Led about, and he didn't mind. Diana rose to the top of Lid's list of people he shouldn't anger. He realized he shouldn't joke about other people's feelings. Lid reads a story to Meldy while they sit in their mother's room and their mother watches. Mel said her brother is an excellent reader and that listening to him read aloud is very interesting. Lid thinks this is the right tone. He is glad Mel is happy, but lately when he doesn't change his voice while reading, she gets angry with him. Noli hadn't realized her son had such a talent. He's a natural actor. Mel said she taught him and asked her mother to praise her too. The mother stroked her daughter's head. My mother is feeling better today, but her complexion still looks off. Her magical exhaustion syndrome has no natural cure. Not everyone in the Batidia family knows this. Litz said that was all for today. Mel asked why. Litz said they had a guest and said goodbye to his mother and sister. The guests turned out to be Christy, who said the product launch was coming soon. After Ken donated the loathing and conditioner, he and Chris held several more meetings. Production was too much for him alone, but Chris' help made it possible. Lid said he was surprised by Chris's skills. That, she replied, was all thanks to his assets. Now we need to increase production volumes. We also need to teach people how to use products and how to care for their health. The girl did not understand what caring for her health meant. Lid considered explaining different skin types, like sensitive, oily, and dry, and Chris was surprised he knew that. Protecting against counterfeit products is also important. We must prevent the creation of products that present themselves as counterfeit. These can be harmful to health. Use customer service as a countermeasure by explaining how to use the product at purchase and offering returns if it is unsuitable, or use a brand logo such as the Bardia family crest. Third, we are partnering with other stores and will distribute the product not only through the Christie's Chamber of Commerce, but also through the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. Christie had also been chosen to be the face of the ad campaign. The girl was surprised to learn this. The hero said she was the perfect fit for the role. He asks Chris to handle the top priority, presenting him to the Magnolia Empire, and a few days later Liner suggests that if the goods are that impressive, they could be presented to their majesties. When Lid goes to the capital, he plans to ask the chamber representative Christie to accompany his father, and his father was surprised it was not him. Too young to judge, the young man said he couldn't point to any one part of a woman's body that makes her beautiful because he wouldn't sound convincing, and he thought she was perfect because of her unique elegance. The lead suggests some men will admire Chris's beauty and want to present her as a gift to their wives and daughters. The boy's father was shocked to hear a 6-year-old speak, confirmed it, and agreed to go to the city with a Chamber of Commerce representative. Chris admitted she wasn't very confident, but said she would try her best, then suddenly remembered something. Pulling out the moon herb, she held one of the healing herbs the young man had asked her to find. Using it can slow down Mother's illness. He started to cry. Lid thanked Chris, who in turn urged him not to lose heart. The lute grass is the only thing left, but he still can't find it and must wait. A few days later, Father and Chris went to the city to deliver a gift to their majesties. Bardia grows the ingredients for lotions and conditioners, and the Chamber of Commerce handles processing, production, and packaging. After leaving skincare development, the hero's next product will be a restoration potion made from moongrass. Even if a complete cure is out of reach, treatment can stabilize the condition until a miracle cure is found. The problem is the hero has no pharmaceutical knowledge. Garn suggested they ask Mrs. Sandra. The teacher asked him what he wanted to find out. Lid said it concerned the grass. Sandra did not know what kind of grass that meant. Lit replied that this magical herb can restore magical power. Sandra jumped up from the receipt. It surprised her to learn moongrass existed. Apologizing for speaking so loudly, she said she had been to the Imperial laboratory earlier, where they were studying a magic power restoration potion, which surprised Lid. Then Sandra told him about her business in the city. Elite mages gathered in the city to develop a potion to restore magical power. Sandra, who had long loved magic and had made her mark on its study, was appointed head of the laboratory. The goods sent last week still haven't arrived. We've seen this before. Development is behind schedule again. We can't do anything about it, so we must change the cooking method. They should have finished the report by now. She's starting to worry. She suddenly ran into an unfamiliar woman she had never seen before in the palace. The woman said that with all kinds of mice running around, the place feels restless. She asked the lead developer about the process. Sandra thinks some aristocrats don't like them. The aristocrats object to them sending large sums of money to unknown people for unknown purposes. People began leaving because they saw no results, which left the team short-staffed, and Sandra decided to take charge and then left the lab. She cut off her family because she feared her resignation would cause a scandal. People talked about the girl and what she did. Attention turned to her failure to carry out a state order. Some even said she deserved only execution or exile. When everyone had nearly forgotten her, Margrave Liner hired her as a teacher. That's how she ended up here. Lid thinks she's in serious trouble, and he'll have to force her to repeat the same research. He wants to save his family, so he asks the teacher to help him. He keeps it a secret. His mother has magic exhaustion syndrome, and there is no cure yet, so he's trying to brew a potion to restore her magic and extend her life a little. Sandra's powers are essential, and the hero asks her to help make a magic power restoration potion. She believed this would repay the debt she owed the Margrave for hiring her. If she was right for him, she said she would help and do everything to save Lady Nainali. Lid took her hand and thanked her. Then he promised to set up Sandra's lab and arrange anything else she might need, and she was thrilled. In the city she found the moon grass but could never obtain it. The lab held no information about the moon grass. She told him he could call her Sandra, but in class he should call her teacher Sandra. The young man agreed, and they laughed together. Lita wonders how his father is getting along with Chris. Chris was at the palace in the city. Calling the lotion and conditioner simply amazing, the woman asked Chris to sell the recipe and rights to the Magnolia Empire. Chris sent a mental call to Mr. Lid. Liner and Christie. During a break on the way to the capital, her father said they would arrive soon and asked if she was ready. She confirmed it, saying it was rare for her, but that she would do everything she could. He warned her to stay on her guard and be careful with her words and actions. The capital was a terrifying place, and a Margrave like him was only a speck of dust in comparison. Emma said she had already seen the capital. Seeing the view, Chris said she admires it every time. This city is a fortress. Magnolia's imperial capital is enclosed by 2 walls. Aristocrats live inside the palace walls, which are about 5 meters high. Beyond those walls is the ordinary city, which is protected by another wall. Emma said the Elven Kingdom wasn't that big. Mr. Liner had already ridden ahead, but they had been standing there for a long time. The guards asked to see their offerings. The Liner laid his hand on the knight's shoulder and said he trusted these women. The guards let them pass. Count Laret's ward is the warrior they just saw, and Count Laret has violated their rights. The man said he likely wanted information about the goods. Chris warned him to be careful. Liner blamed it on his own fault for failing to explain. He did not know something like this could happen during an interrogation. Count Lyra appeared and said he had not expected to see him there. They had not seen each other for a long time. Then he asked who the woman behind him was. She said her name was Christy Saffron. He called her a hooligan who had run away from the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. Rumors circulated about her, but none were confirmed. Then he moved on to Emma. According to him, they were truly friends with the animals. Calling beastmen animals is considered an insult. He says it on purpose to anger Chris. Christy clenched her fists, ready to speak because she wouldn't let anyone insult Emma. Margrave Lanner stepped in, leaving her no time to act, calling it too much and saying they had come for an audience with their majesties, and it was foolish of him to insult them. After agreeing and apologizing, he left, saying he had business to attend to. The girls in the reception area asked who it had been, and the Margraver said it was Laurent Galliano, who adores money. Emma went to Miss Chris and apologized for causing trouble. Christy hugged Emma and reassured her that she was innocent. Count Lara was blacklisted by Christie's chambers. The liner assured them not to worry. Their majesties were ordinary people with common sense. A maid entered and offered to show them the way. The hero says all the nobles are gathered in the audience hall. The newcomer asks if they have kept everyone waiting. Featuring Empress Matilda Magnolia and Emperor Erwin Magnolia. Lena Bardia announces he has arrived at the palace. He apologizes to his companion for always making them travel so far. She says she is Baron Martin Saffron's daughter from the Kingdom of Astolia. She introduces herself as Christy Saffron. Laner is surprised to hear Christy is from the Chamber of Commerce rather than a baron's daughter. Christy explains her father only recently got the title. Liner says that because she's a nobleman's daughter, he treated her badly. His interlocutor is shocked. The women whisper that she was more than just a girl from the Chamber of Commerce. The Empress wants to try the goods as soon as possible, and the Emperor asks to be introduced. Christy says she brought it to them and is showing them the goods. The young man notices the men show no interest, while the Empress and the maids are clearly very interested. Smiling, Christy says she uses both the lotion and the conditioner herself. The Empress asks to touch her hair. Christy, of course, agrees. Surprised, the Empress says it's the first time she has seen hair so smooth and shiny. Only women can appreciate how valuable hair like that is, she says. Christy suggests she try the lotion. A man steps forward to the king and asks for forgiveness, warning it could be dangerous. She makes it clear she is speaking with Christy. The Empress coldly asks Count Elar when she last asked for his opinion. Christy says the lotion eases dryness. The Empress asks whether Christy plans to bribe all the ladies in the palace. Delighted, the Empress is ready to declare this product the best. The Emperor says the lotion is amazing. She offers to sell Christy the recipe and sends it to the Magnolia Empire. Someone asks Mrs. Christy whether she can hear. The girl says she cannot accept the offer. She explains she cannot decide on her own. The Emperor insists that Margrave Lanar, as a vassal, cannot refuse them. Christy breaks down over Mr. Liner, screaming that she can't do anything. Mr. Lid appears and tells you to rely on him. He says the Chamber of Commerce took a risk by releasing this product. If anyone tries to take away their rights, they should leave the area. Instead, he gives His Majesty the right to receive the goods first. The Empress says she will try to keep the goods in stock and asks for their forgiveness. The Empress replies calmly that it will be so. The courtier anxiously asks whether Your Majesty is sure. Christy is right, the woman says. Taking away people's rights will make the empire fall. She says rights must be reconsidered. The Emperor agrees and promises to enforce citizens' rights more strictly. He reserves production rights for Christy. He asks whether everyone agrees. The courtiers bow and say yes. Surprised, Christy thinks about how quickly everything began to fall into place. A sudden idea hits her, and she wonders if this was all a setup. Christy thinks about the Empress's behavior and sees her aim wasn't production or rights, but to get lotion and conditioner. Christy believes the Empress could not simply give the order because that would be an abuse of authority, so the Empress forced Christy to promise it to her personally. Christy's pride is wounded, and she feels like a speck of dust beside the Empire, realizing she has merely been dancing to the Empress's tune. Later, seated in a chair, Christy admits she is very tired. Liner serves her tea, compliments her, and reminds her that he told her to be careful. A servant announces that their majesties have come to see them. Christy and her maid are shocked. Entering the room, the Emperor and Empress apologize for the sudden visit and for not greeting everyone properly. The Empress apologizes to Christy for having to take part in this and explains what happened today. Margrave Liner had already delivered samples to their majesties, and the product was so astonishing that rumors began to spread. Some aristocrats sought the rights to this valuable gift from Bardia's territory. Now there is a chance to renegotiate the aristocrats' rights. Overall, she finds the day productive. Christy says everything is fine. Now that the production rights were given to Chris, the aristocrats won't be able to get them easily. The emperor says he needs to talk with Liner. Meanwhile, the women decide to recap their conversation. The empress immediately gets down to business about who should receive the goods first. Christie is surprised by the haste. The emperor tells Liner that someone from another country has approached him about a marriage, and this has created a problem. He tells Liner that his son is the best choice for this marriage. The narrator describes a strange feeling, like something was coming out of him and a crack had formed at the bottom of a glass. She says the illness began suddenly. At first she felt tired, and later she could not stand. The woman lay in bed, growing weak, and considered what she might do to help her body. You should begin to feel that the disease has stopped progressing. She says she slept terribly. Lid started snapping at others. Mel began crying more often, and she worries about why the disease is eating away at her children's hearts. Lately, the mother has noticed Lid acting differently and speaking like an adult. Mel happily reports that her brother read her a book. Mother sees that the kid's behavior has improved, and she too cannot give up. Determined, she believes she can overcome this disease. Lid lies on the grass, shading his eyes with his hand, and says the weather is nice. Seeing Daddy and Chris working so hard, he wants to help and decides to try attribute magic like in the game. Lid notices this universe closely resembles the world of Tokyorella, a game he played in a past life. After getting the materials, the young man made personal care products that were impossible in the game, and he knows his life could be completely different here. He's already checked the fire, so he'll proceed to the other attributes. Forming a wall of ice, he says he did it. The lead is deciding on attribute names and wants ones that are easy to picture, like Fire Spear or Thunder Spear. Shouting the spell name with conviction, he says Fire Spear. Admiringly, Lid says it is wonderful. Mel lets out a delighted scream. Horrified, Lid realizes she saw everything. Mel says she has been watching since the moment he summoned the light. Let's ask Mel to keep his magic their secret. Mel marvels at the beauty of magic. Lid promises to read any book Mel chooses. He worries that if everyone finds out, rumors will spread. Mel asks to show him the magic again. A few days later, he received a letter from Chris asking whether they had succeeded. The letter says Count Laurent is banned from entry and warns that Empress Matilda is dangerous. Led finds this odd and is puzzled why the unknown count was suddenly denied entry. The teacher says classes will begin soon. She explains attribute magic requires a certain aptitude. When the woman asks whether special talents are needed for special magic, Lid admits he doesn't know. The teacher praises him, saying he doesn't need anything. Lid looks surprised and asks whether that means anyone can use it. The woman says magic must be made by each person or received from someone else. Lid is delighted it can be made. Lid asks whether it's the same special magic, and the teacher confirms it but says they need a clearer image and stronger magic or nothing will work. The teacher says only the creator of this special magic can pass it on, and both people must have enormous magical power for that to happen. Lid concludes that without enough power or a clear image, the magic will not activate, and the teacher confirms it. According to the teacher, Moongrass can restore magical power. Lade wonders what will happen to it. Grateful, the woman thanks Lid, forgets about her uniform, calls out that she'll create samples, says she'll study on her own, and runs off. Lid realizes original magic requires magical power and wonders how much he has. He thinks there might be magic or a tool that can measure how much of it there is. A young man says the rain is heavy and decides he must hurry back. He apologizes for getting wet, and the maids worry Mr. Lid will catch a cold and fuss over him. Trying to calm them, the hero meets firm resistance as they remember his fall in the garden and insist he needs to be warmed up. Lit relaxes in the bath, noting how long it has been since he last bathed and how good it feels. Baths are rare here. People usually just dry off with a hot towel, so he didn't expect a bath in his own room. He wants to know how much water is used for an event like that. The hero realizes the numeric standards in this world match those from his past. He's getting ready to run an experiment. Lid says he filled a liter vessel with water made by magic. He emptied it, refilled it, and repeated this several times. The young man decides to name it 1 liter. He says he can do it now and will try 10 times next time. The lead repeats this over and over and increases the number, thinking it will help him concentrate. About using magical power. Breathing a sigh of relief, he announces the final number, 980. Lid explains that because a fixed amount of power is used to create 1 liter of magic, he has more than 980 magical power. The new magic is called magic power measurement and measures magical power as a numerical value. He decides he needs to try measuring magical power. Standing before the vessel on the stump, the hero confirms nothing happened. The young man says he heard it in his head. Repeating himself, he says the phrase measurement of magical power. Lid heard again that his magic power was 60 and understood that using the dimension required 20 units of magic power. Joyfully, he says he succeeded. The hero believes the measurement will help when he asks his mother to drink the potion, so he will be able to see the result. Today he says he's one step closer to his goal. The teacher asks him to repeat his question. Lid wanted to know how much magical power was being used, so he made a special spell to measure it, magical power measurement. The teacher is taken aback by his way of thinking and does not understand how he came up with it. Explaining the creation process to Sandra, he used water measurements to create a spell for 1 liter and then proposed ideas about the numerical values. Sandra admits the idea never occurred to her and tells Lid pushily that that's just how it turned out. Lid notices her odd reaction and warns that if the magic spreads, he will be sent to the Imperial capital. The hero is stunned. He hadn't realized how serious it was. Sandra suggests talking about it with ordinary people in mind. Everyone has magic, and Lid can't understand it. She explains most people don't know how to use it and never receive even the most basic education. Despite being a fantasy world with magic, none of it is used in battles, by the army, by adventurers, or in exploration. Lid realized he had not seen many mages in the mansion, because people tend to avoid studying things they find tedious. He's disappointed that a fantasy world doesn't have magic on every corner and thinks it's a waste. Sandra says she couldn't create a spell for just 1 liter. It would not be easy for her, and she believes only a genius could do it. She now sees Reed as more talented than she first thought, and believes he may be an even greater genius than she is. Lid thinks that if he's a genius, teacher Sandra should have been invited to the capital long ago. She says that's why she was chosen as director of the capital's research institute. The woman says someone else's envy crushed her, but confirms she was invited to the capital as a genius. Smiling, Lid says he expected something like this from Sandra's teacher. She admits she had been looking forward to this day to observe her talented student and research subject. The woman urges him not to let boundaries hold him back and says that if he stands out too much, no one will push him away. Lid says he understands, but for now he'll try not to tell anyone about it, even though she could have warned him beforehand. He says she thought it would be more interesting this way. She confirms that's exactly the reason. When he says she's scaring him, Lydia laughs and says he's too easy to read. The narrator says they then continued developing a drug to restore magical power. Sandra shows them their materials, moongrass, and they'll try many variations, eating it raw, powdered, and boiled. Lid knows the moongrass is much better, but he is willing to try it for his mother's sake. The hero vows to do it all. You think about everything he ate. Experiment results show the raw herb stores 20 strength and is reported to be very bitter. Cooking yields unstable results between 10 and 30 units, and there are complaints that it has gotten worse. The bitterness has increased, and he has to eat it all. As a powder, the recovery is 50 units. Reed says the easiest way to take it was mixed with water, though it still wasn't very tasty. Reed concludes the last option is the best. Sandra says the problem is the method of administration and suggests rolling the powder around in his mouth, which makes Reed mentally call her the devil. The woman concludes that powder tablets would be best for Ms. Nainali and praises Reed, who has become very ill. Reed realizes tearfully that they have succeeded in making a drug to restore magical power. It seemed Sandra was having fun. She pressured him, asked if it tasted good, and said she put love into it. Flushed with embarrassment and anger, the hero tells the teacher he will not forget this. Sandra says he'll understand everything tomorrow. Reed feels uneasy about this. She offers him a hint. Anything can be asked of Mrs. Meldy. Reed joyfully announces his return to Mel, and she greets him happily. Surprised, he calls her name after noticing something strange. Mel recoils from him and yells that he smells bad. Hiding behind the maid, she says he smells so bad and that he is not her brother. Reed is stunned and confused and realizes no one is coming toward him. Holding his nose, the butler says the man smells and tells him to take a bath. Reed apologizes and Sandra, cursing in her head, rushes to the bathroom. Knights are shown exercising while counting. Reed says the knights were doing exercises. The captain called it amazing, but Reuben still feels sick from the grass. He yells at him not to shirk, even though the exercises have got harder. Reed thinks Rubens is a talented knight. Reed remembers Rubens was the first to see how important exercise is, but he did not expect it to go this far. Rubens sneaks up on Reed and tells him he can't relax or he'd have died in the fight. The man says Reed can now train in the dungeons and announces a new dungeon that delights Reed. Rubens explains that a dungeon is a subspecies of living creature, a place with monsters, materials, and leveling. He says the dungeon's core gathers magical power underground, creating monsters and treasure, and people killed by those monsters become food for the dungeon. The hero warns that unless the dungeon is cleared, the monsters will escape into the outside world. Knights and adventurers take charge. He says destroying them would require destroying the core, which would make everything collapse, so the knights just patrol and check on them. Reed compares it to an anthill, with the queen at the center and the monsters as the workers. The young man is interested in the Adventurers Guild. Rubens explains adventurers are like general laborers and that guilds can be public or private. The guild system is explained in detail. Freelance adventurers accept requests. Local adventurers mainly collect items. Reed says he would like to register too. Rubens praises his swordsmanship and says he will excel at conquering dungeons. The young man hopes that by then Rubens will be married to Diana. Rubens asks sheepishly that this not be mentioned. Reed can't understand his uncertainty because Diana would return his feelings, and Rubens explains it's because Reed doesn't like getting up in the morning. He says Diana always comes to wake him, but she will not do it forever because one day she will have a husband. When she makes him breakfast, she says it's not for him but practice for the wedding. If her parents hint, she says Rubens is just a friend. He feels he just cannot please this girl. After hearing it, Reed concludes that Diana is a real tsundere. Reed reminds Rubens of their childhood promise and insists Rubens must go on a date with Diana. Rubens is shocked and doesn't understand why he suddenly made that decision. Reed says a knight should not hesitate and urges Rubens to consider the true meaning of her words. Rubens repeats the true meaning to himself thoughtfully. Reed is glad a good idea came to him. Rubens says he understands everything. Mel asks her brother what he is laughing about. Her brother thinks about how complicated things are and says it's best not to tell anyone else yet. Diana remembers how often they played here. The girl asks him what he wanted. He calls her shyly. He later read and heard reports that they had finally started dating. Staring out the window, the hero thinks he wanted them to marry right away. Mel wakes her brother cheerfully, shouting that it's already morning. Reed, still sleepy, wishes her good morning. Notes say Mel has been waking him in the mornings lately. He used to be the first one up, and she resented not being able to wake him. After breakfast, she goes back to her studies, learning etiquette, languages, and dance to prepare for the future. Reed knows mornings are a precious time to spend with her beloved brother. At 4 years old, she is very active. The hero remembers Mel waking him. At that moment, his father announces he is back. Reed happily greets his father and Chris. Chris, looking very tired, softly says his name. The young man asks Chris if she is all right. Father says Her Majesty enjoyed talking with Chris, orders her to sleep in the guest room, and calls Reed into his study for a talk. The man looks very serious, and Reed doesn't understand what's going on. In the office, the father sits across from his son and asks Reed, point blank, why he changed so suddenly. The father notes Reed stayed calm under pressure and was clearly doing mature work, not childish tasks. He adds that this applies to gifts and insists there are no books in the mansion with that knowledge, demanding an explanation. At a loss, Reed didn't expect his father to put this much pressure on him, and he can't think what to say but finds it hard to keep lying to him. He decides to speak honestly. Choosing his words carefully, the young man begins his story and explains that on the day in the garden he lost consciousness and remembered his past life. Memories from his past life and Reed's memories merged, and a new him was born, with the personality from his past life as the foundation while Reed's feelings remained. He explains that Reed felt guilty about his sister among the handmaidens. Always respectful toward his father, he wanted to be just as strong. The hero despaired at being unable to help his dying mother. That's why he wants to protect his family and his mother. Father calls Reed. The man apologizes and says he was just watching and had no idea, assuming Reed was acting only for himself. He admits he failed as a father. Reed replies tearfully that his father did notice the changes in him. Reed asks his father whether he believes his story. His father replies that he does, saying it explains everything. The boy adds that he created the drug using knowledge from a past life. Reed explains it is a drug that restores magical power and father is shocked by the discovery. The young man says he supplied the materials, Sandra made it, and he devised a spell to test its power, and the father is shocked by everything, especially the moon flowers and Sandra's role. Her father says the drug is only a temporary fix for Nainali. It will extend her life but won't cure her. The man asks whether Reed learned this in a past life, what else he knows, and promises to help. He asks Haroon to join their discussion. Father says he wanted to talk about a different matter. Father announces he has chosen a bride for Reed. How does one ask if he needs to propose? Father says everything is already decided and the engagement will take place in a couple of months. Father admitted he was surprised. The king raised the issue unexpectedly. He protests that he is too young to marry, and his father explains the marriage to Princess Renelute is political and meant to strengthen their relationship. Reed still thinks they're just kids. Father tells Haroon to get ready to meet the princess at the mansion. A rude note says the mansion is too small for the princess, and he suggests building a new one that takes cultural differences into account. The father agrees and asks Haroon to prepare the plans, promising government funding. Reed asks his father why a princess from another kingdom would marry him, given their family's lower status. Father says it's simple. Dark elves rule the kingdom of Renelute. Pointing to a map, the man shows Renelute bordering their lands and describes a conflict between the human and dark elf kingdoms called the Barsta Incident. Father says the people of Barst hunted the dark elves, which damaged relations and ended trade ties. Renelute became a vassal of the Magnolia Empire in exchange for the empire's aid and a ban on workers, yet it kept its autonomy. Eventually, everyone was released. The father explains marrying the emperor's son would be risky because it could lead to a struggle for the throne, so they proposed a marriage with an aristocrat. Reed realizes that their remote Margraviate is the perfect place to exile the princess. Father says Reed, as the son of an imperial aristocrat, has no right to refuse, even though he tried to object to his majesty. Reed feels sorry for the princess because as a vassal she is forced to marry the Margrave's son. His father advises him because he believes he should be a husband who values her above all else. He asks if Reed can make the princess, betrayed by fate, happy and says everything is in his hands. His father tells him to protect her like his own princess. Reed, determination in his eyes, says he understands everything. The young man asks her name. Her father replies she is the first princess, Farah Renelute. Reed says the name of his future wife to himself, Farah Reno. Later, Reed recalled telling his father he wanted to take part in the design, so he asked permission to visit the kingdom of Renelute. He says he can't fully explain it, but it's tied to his past life and might help treat his mother. The father agrees, but only for a few days, saying there is time before the marriage announcement and that he will arrange an unofficial visit. Reed thinks about marrying at age 6, and Haroon speaks to him at that moment. Haroon says he's confident Reed will make the princess happy. Reed thanks him and says he'll try his best. He's still a child, and Reed says the term young wife isn't quite right. Haru apologizes, and Reed replies cheerfully that it's no big deal. Reed walks to the guest room, calls to Chris, then quietly peeks inside, thinking she might be asleep. Entering the room, he quietly calls Chris's name. The hero realizes she must be exhausted. A young man spots Chris asleep and finds her beautiful. Chris mumbles anxiously in her sleep, clearly having a nightmare about the Empress. Reed feels awkward as he steps inside. He tries to get out, but the door won't open. Panic sets in as he imagines someone holding the door from the other side. The young man hears Mel's voice say she won't let him go and is shocked to realize she is his sister. Mel scolds him for coming in without permission. Reed says he only wanted to check on her and begs his sister to open the door. The girl keeps teasing him, and Reed, panicked, asks her to hurry before Chris wakes up. Chris wakes up and apologizes for falling asleep from fatigue. Reed is relieved to think he wasn't caught. He apologizes for what happened in the capital. It turns out Chris has already told him everything, including the Count, the negotiations, and that she was kept in the dark. She described how rudely Count Roland had treated her. The Emperor offered to punish him, but Chris, to the Count's surprise, refused. Chris entered the throne room and addressed the Emperor. Chris said she had something to say, and the Emperor let her speak. She urged all nobles to ignore rumors and base their views on evidence, or their country would be looked down on in diplomatic circles. She urged them to take this opportunity to reflect and correct their mistakes. The Emperor apologized for his aristocracy's lack of education and asked her to forgive them. The problem affected not only Roland but the whole aristocracy. It was unclear who had been reprimanded, and Reed says it was much more serious than he thought. Reed admires her and thinks she is a great woman. When Chris asks him what he said again, Reed says she misheard. The young man asks if this means all they can do now is wait and watch Roland, and Chris replies that his faction has already lost its position and influence. Chris explains that Roland didn't get his title of Count by chance, and Reed understands that they needed to defeat this enemy if they wanted to expand their trade. Reed says he's pleased with the successful negotiations and grateful that Christie's company came to Bardia, and he thanks them. Chris says she is honored to hear that and feels very lucky to have met him. She thinks about not being recognized no matter how hard she tried, and how her efforts bore no fruit. Chris was born into a trading company where her older brother was meant to be the heir, but her business sense was much sharper. She insisted she'd support her brother behind the scenes and stuck to that role until people started talking. Chris's track record made her the obvious choice to inherit the company. Concerned the company might collapse amid controversy, she chose to go independent. Even the most talented person finds starting from scratch in an unfamiliar place very hard. Some days she made no progress. Suddenly, something changed. She believes talent alone often won't bring results without luck, yet she kept fighting and doing her best because luck only comes to those who work hard. Reed says his butler told him about her company, and he credits everything he learned about her to her own efforts. He says Chris has achieved a lot and asks where her confidence is. She remembers how hard she worked. At times it was extremely hard. Maybe she always wanted someone to notice her. She is very glad this day has come. Chris apologizes for losing her temper. Reed reassures her and asks if His Majesty will work with her now. Chris confirms and lists the terms, requests a 1-month supply with full prepayment, and says this does not apply to additional orders. She says the growing season is just beginning, but she has already taken steps and asked her father to get fertilizer. Reed admires her business sense after she used her contacts to win a contract, place orders, and push up the market price of aloe. The young man sees the Empress will now be very busy. Chris says he is good at advertising and even managed to win over the Empress. Chris claims only a few people in the world are as handsome as he is, and she sheepishly adds that he should choose his words more carefully. Reed offers her a great slogan, "You can be as beautiful as Chris," and Chris sheepishly agrees. After a long talk, the hero says he persuaded her to name the products Christy Lotion and Christy Emma Hair Dye. Chris is surprised to discover that paint can be made not only from olive oils, but also from essential oils. Reed believes she does not intend to stop at Justice products, and he understands they will keep evolving. Chris says they need to stay optimistic. Reed adds they can now deal directly with Her Majesty. Reed recalls Chris muttering in her sleep that Empress Matilda was dangerous. Smiling, he notices that she even talks about Her Majesty in her sleep and tells her to stay away from the Empress. Chris can't figure out how he knows about her dream. Reed replies innocently that he heard it while she slept. She screams that looking at a sleeping girl's face is the height of indecency. Eavesdropping behind the door, Mel misunderstood everything and is ready to defend Mr. Reed's honor. Meanwhile, Nally lies in bed, her heart racing as she concentrates on the sound of dripping water. Tears fall as she whispers no, she will not give up. The woman looks ahead with determination and promises she will definitely get back on her feet. Trying to convince herself everything is fine, the Nolly gathers her strength. A knock sounds at the door. Nali lets someone in, saying it's open. Liner, Reed, and Sandra enter. Sandra greets them politely and wishes them a good day. Sitting up in bed, Nali Bardia apologizes for how she looks and introduces herself as the Margrave's wife. Reed admires how generous his mother is. Sandra introduces herself and says she works in magical research. Standing by the bed, Liner says he kept the disease's name from her until now because he was a coward. What keeps you from living a normal life? A fatal, incurable disease that drains magical power. Ninali replies calmly that she already knew. Horrified, Liner asks who told her. Telling her husband not to make that face, she says she already knew about her condition. She simply didn't like being just sick. She read the cries and realized that her mother had long since accepted her illness. Reed apologizes for bringing up her painful memories. Nanali calls herself a useless mother. The hero says that because his mother is useless, his father, who called himself bad, is useless too, and he was only repeating the father's words. Outraged by his son's secrecy, Liner remains upset as Nanali asks him to call Maldi just Mel. The boy screams, asking if he had thought about his mother. He asks his son how difficult he believes it was for her to go through all this alone. The man admits he knew about the fatal disease, so he looked away and threw himself into work. He regrets leaving her alone. Liner admits his mistake, and Nenali reassures him that she understood he had other concerns. The man tells her he loves her. Nenali replies she loves him too. Sandra cuts in, saying they should get down to business. She gives Nenali the drug and explains it won't cure her but will ease her symptoms. Reed warns it tastes unpleasant and advises washing it down with water immediately. Nenali goes pale as everyone rushes to her in a panic. Terrified and convinced things are bad, Reed screams as he casts the Measure magical power spell. Natalie has only 8 magic power left, and Reed shouts to Sandra to give Natalie the medicine quickly. Sandra cries out her name in horror. Nenali coughs up blood. The girl tried to shout to get the woman to open the door. Shivering and drooling, the woman gasped and managed to call out to Rainer once. The boy urged his mother to keep going no matter what. She looked at her son, exhausted, as he screamed in terror and called for her, not wanting her to abandon him. A man burst into the room, kissed the woman, and the boy was completely surprised. The young man met Nenali while he was still Arvin's assistant and working in the capital. He even had to disguise himself, and in a conversation with Arvin, he asked if he really had to go into town for the routine census. Dressed in disguise and also wearing a wig, he told his friend he just wanted to go for a walk. 2 reasons explained it, one being his wish to buy a gift for his wife. The man frowned at that excuse. Outraged by his friend's actions, Arvin rejected sending a servant or asking someone else to do it because he wanted to choose for himself. His friend had to give in because the man was unstoppable, and that made him smile. He later explained that his father had been ill and was having trouble running the government. The young man asked if things were really that bad. The matter was serious. In a few years, Arvin would have to take over his father's business, and he was unlikely to have the chance to travel to the city then. That's why the young man wanted to see the landscapes I would later defend. He asked his friend not to worry about his problems and thanked him for coming to the city with him. On the bridge, the friends heard screams from below. Someone was begging to be let go. The man asked his friend if he could go over and check. Arvind agreed but warned him not to overdo it. As he fled, the young man asked Dinas to stay with his master. A crowd of men surrounded the young woman, and one of them hadn't expected to see her there. He took her hand to keep the conversation going. She replied that the man had already been officially rejected, so there was nothing to discuss, and she did not want to talk to someone with such a huge, inflated ego. He refused to give in, and cruel grins spread across his and his friends' faces as the girl grew visibly frightened. He liked the look on her face. The man said the carriage would arrive soon, and the woman now had to pay for every time she made him uncomfortable. A man pressed painfully on her chin and squeezed it, so she tried to call for help. A young man called from behind the crowd and asked what they were doing. A stranger covered the lady's mouth with his hand, and his companion said they were lovers who had been meeting secretly, but the man who came to help proved wiser and asked the lady herself. All she needed was a way to signal whether the men were bothering her. The girl bit the hand holding her, screamed that none of them were her mate, and asked for help. He needed nothing more. He already understood everything. The young man quickly dealt with the group of hooligans, and not wanting to argue, told them to leave. As he fled, Logos from Count Galliano's family promised to remember them. The man turned to the woman and asked if she was hurt, but she started to stutter. She thanked him for saving her. She had been screaming, but no one rushed to help. She could no longer bear it and broke down in tears from the stress and fear she had endured. The young man patted her on the back and praised her for holding up well. Arvin and Dinis were approaching them, worried about whether he was okay. The man scolded the bodyguard for shouting his name so loudly since they were there in secret, and the woman admired her savior, thinking him handsome. A couple of months later, Rainer unexpectedly received a notification that someone had proposed to him. His friend said his parents were not against the marriage, but the man refused to believe it because it seemed impossible, and it was the first time he had heard about it. Arvin Helden has written approval from his family. After removing the letter's contents, the boy scratched the back of his head. It was clearly in his father's handwriting. His bride was the Crimson Lady Nenali Ranamis. Previously, she had rejected every suitor, and many said she was stunningly beautiful. Rainer remained unconvinced since he had never seen her. Later, the young man arrived at the estate and was surprised to find the girl he had recently helped was now his bride. She was glad the man remembered her because she had thought they would never meet again. Rainer suddenly noticed the girl was beautiful, something he'd missed the last time they'd met. At last he understood why they nicknamed her the Crimson Lady. Confused, Nenali asked him what he meant by that. Rainer explained further that she had beautiful red hair and was a lovely woman, which confused the girl. Suddenly she apologized and said she got the nickname when a man proposed to her. She refused him sharply, and he could not recover. After that incident, people called Renelute a difficult, unapproachable girl whom no one could handle, and she blushed deeply as she told it while the young man listened and understood, though he had meant the nickname to mean something else. A smile suddenly lit her face when she understood the lovely meaning the young man had given the nickname, and she began to like it. Rainer told Renelute he really liked her. To avoid dragging things out, he said he wanted her to marry him and move with him to Bardia. The woman believed that if he did not oppose her, it would be nothing but joy for her. Renelute swallowed the drug, and the girl asked Mr. Reed how much magical power there was. The boy responded quickly and began to say, quote, 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 power measurement, mentally pleading for everything to be all right. Rainer suddenly answered for him. His wife had 101 units of magical power left. Delighted, the child told Sandra they had succeeded, then turned to his mother as the girl began calling for her mistress, and Renelute opened her eyes and looked at her son. She gave him her familiar radiant smile and tried to reassure the boy that she was fine. The child couldn't bear it any longer and burst into loud cries. Afterward, a doctor examined Renelute and reassured the family that another attack was unlikely, so they agreed on medication 3 times a day and, as a precaution, posted maids nearby to watch their mistress. Reed was impressed that the drug restored a full 100 units of his magic in a single dose. Santa believed this happened because of Rainer. Renelute could not open her mouth to take the medicine, so the man moved quickly, putting the water and medicine into his mouth and passing them to the lady with a kiss. The boy was pleased that his father found his bearings so quickly and truly thought him a wonderful person, and he asked the girl if she had any free time, but she was surprised that Reed did not want to spend it with his family. The child turned to his parents, saw them happy together, and decided to leave them alone for a while. Norris approached His Majesty and asked if he had read the letter. He said their country had been completely disrespected. The marriages should have been with the royal family, or at least with aristocrats of equal rank. It seemed the empire held them in low regard by ignoring their demands and deciding everything unilaterally. So the marriage had to be with the Margrave's son, and they were the same age. The king told the man that everything had been decided. They could not influence the marriage because they could not bring themselves to say they disliked their future husband. It would be much easier if problems came from the empire's side. Hearing that, the elf smiled ominously. The aristocrat decided to test whether the Margrave's son had genuine talent, and Norris volunteered to handle it while His Majesty explained exactly what he had in mind. After explaining his plan, the man asked with a mysterious expression what the king thought. Sandra was pleased that the boy understood his parents' wishes. Looking at him, she said an adult seemed to be hiding inside the child's body. Reed laughed because she knew that could not be true. He remembered he needed to consult his girlfriend because she would be nearby when the young man cast a new spell, and she was frightened because she did not know his new plan. He wanted to create a spell called Remember. Someone once told the boy that once something entered the brain, it could never be forgotten and stayed deep in memory. Reborn now, he still remembers his past life, so memory exists not only in the brain but in the soul. Reed wondered if there was a way to see those soul memories. Sandra said it was similar to what she called the theory of the living soul. He asked again, indicating he wanted a detailed answer. Sandra thought it was one of the theories in the science of magic. The basis of this theory was roughly similar to their thinking. Reed understood it all, but he regarded it as just one of the world's philosophies. The boy wondered whether it would help. The theory held that life force was the source of magic and showed the way to divinity. Put simply, as Reed had said, it was the soul, and the child realized they could influence magical power by changing the soul, but no one could predict what would happen. Sitting in a meditative pose, he folded his hands into a circle. If magical power came from the soul or life force, he had to focus on something deep inside his body. After concentrating for a while, the boy felt no change but kept going, knowing the magic had to be converted into vital force and wanting to sense where that force would flow. Immersed in the sensations, he realized the power was reaching somewhere, and when he opened his eyes, saw what looked like a hole but thought it might be dangerous. Reed realized he was in a different place, surrounded by bookshelves, when a voice greeted him. Across the table sat a child who was his spitting image, smiling kindly. The boy decided to ask who the child was. The copy paused and suggested the name Memory. The image embodied Reed's memory because he had come to delve into the memories of his past life. Reed wondered whether it would cooperate so easily. The image indicated he had to extract the memories himself, It was like searching social networks, so the child had to cope. Closing his eyes, he pictured the network. It looked straightforward, but he had to keep his focus. Most people couldn't reach this place, but Reed was different. The image told him to speak to it directly because its memory could find any information in the world. The boy wondered how to summon it, but Reed said to use magic. It then asked the hero to follow its advice. He made it there this time, but the place was fragile and dangerous, so the memory asked Reed not to return. Once more the image reminded him that the hero could call him by name if necessary, and the boy agreed and thanked him. As he came to his senses, Sandra called to him anxiously. Startled by the surprise, the hero stepped back and scared the girl too. He asked her what she was doing, but Sandra felt she should have been the one asking. Her friend said the boy froze and sat in dead silence, but when she stepped closer he screamed. Reed apologized for the disruption. She stood up and brushed herself off, worried about him because he had been sitting motionless for a long time. He stared at his hands and remembered his last clear thought that he shouldn't have returned. The world had been so fragile the hero might have been trapped there forever. Reed hesitated to tell Sandra about it. When she asked, he said nothing had worked. Surprised, Sandra apologized for not being able to help. Sitting on the bed, the child suddenly made a decision and searched his memory. Almost immediately he appeared, greeted him, and said he was surprised by his quick return. Reed was delighted that he had actually been heard. The image looked indignant. The boy had not believed him before. He asked what the child was looking for, but the child only wanted to test this way of communicating. The memory asked to be called the next time help was needed and disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Visiting his mother, the boy entered the room and immediately asked how she was. Looking happy, the woman told her son she felt better than before thanks to the medication and asked the assistant to confirm, while the assistant said they were still working on the dosage, but there had been no problems. The hero looked at them and compared them to two cats. Sandra noticed and immediately realized he had thought something offensive about them. The young man quickly defended himself, saying it was the other way around. Since Nanel nearly suffered a fatal seizure, the girl became her attending physician because she had long researched magical power and was the perfect candidate. Reed had also taught her how to measure power. Determined to heal his mother, the boy raced to finish a cure as soon as possible. If he succeeded, he could help her and others with the disease. A hand suddenly touched his cheek. The woman pulled him out of his thoughts. His son was tense. The child reassured her that he was only thinking, and she asked him not to push himself too hard. Sandra told the gentleman it was time to go to his father, who had called, and as they parted Nanali decided to say hello to Rainer. Suddenly the man announced the trip date was set, and the boy looked visibly nervous. Reed planned to go to Renelute to treat his mother. The medicine required a large amount of moongrass, which would not grow in their territory, so that was the main reason for the trip. Renelute had a developed agricultural sector, and Reed hoped to find a solution there. From memories of his past life, the boy knew he could find the information he needed there. Rainer warned his son not to let their guard down. It was clear something was brewing in the country. The young man did not understand what his father meant. He explained that King Elias wanted to promote friendship between their countries and that all the aristocrats agreed with him. The son asked solemnly who these aristocrats were. Rainer suspected they all belonged to his son's fiancée's faction, and the boy quickly realized that meant some nobles would see him as an unsuitable husband because the local aristocrats' feelings were understandable, and they resented their vassal status and wanted independence for their country. But if this went too far, it could be dangerous. Reed wondered how his father could know all this. Rainer believed no walls were impenetrable. Information could be gathered from any country. That information was needed to protect one's home. Rainer's spies in Renelute surprised the son. The man thought it a good guess but kept quiet. The boy would have preferred to stay ignorant. The king understood Norris's point of view, but the girl's future father-in-law, Rainer Bardia, was known as the strongest man in the Magnolia Empire, and his lands lay almost on the border with their country, which made the match ideal. Aristocrat Norris Tamusuka agreed with him, but they wanted to marry into the Imperial family and would accept no fallback plan. Other members at the meeting agreed with him. Norris was always a character. Proud to be a dark elf, he rallied an entire faction of patriots. Marriage would let him put down roots in another country. First Renelute would stop being a vassal, then he would take full control of the empire. Rhesus came in and apologized. The man asked what the elf wanted. The elf had come to ask about Farah and whether it was true they planned to send her away as a hostage and force her into marriage. The father dismissed it, not knowing who could have spread such nonsense, but apparently it was Norris. The boy grew angry because no one had told him, but the girl was only 6, so moving to a foreign country was impossible. Racists began shouting, unable to understand why it was necessary, and the king explained that keeping ties with Magnolia would help the boy, when he himself became king, understand his father's decision. Yet the young prince refused to accept it. The man frowned but kept his calm because his son was still too young and emotional. He sent him back to his room to cool down and collect his thoughts. It wasn't something he should have brought up. The boy hurried down the corridor, not even noticing the people nearby. The girl greeted her brother loudly, surprising him because Pharaoh rarely came, then explained that her mother had invited her and that she was also curious how he had ended up there. The brother recounted a conversation with his father in which he lost his temper, and his father became angry. Pharaoh was surprised and could not believe the king could be angry. He found his sister Risa very beautiful, much like their mother. Despite her youth, she had received a good education, and every movement was refined and elegant. The young prince was proud of his little sister. The attendant told the princess it was time to go, so she turned to her brother and bid him farewell. Watching his sister leave, the prince was once again convinced that his father's actions were wrong. Determined to keep his little sister safe, the young prince vowed to protect her. He read Helda's head and could not understand what those memories were. The boy had just invented a special magic called memory to explore his past. By picturing an image in his mind, he could pull up the information he needed. As he spoke to the image, the magic slowly faded. Wondering why he had upset the memory so deeply, the hero kept asking it about the plot. Memory couldn't figure out what the boy wanted because the boy kept skipping dialogue, and now even when Memory searched his own memories, he found only fragments. Because the game was so absorbing, Reed ignored the plot and focused on something else. The young man needed help. It was an automated Cinderella-style game with love interests who were princes from different countries, and one character was supposed to be a man named Racist in Renelute. It was still pretty hard. Reed decided to take the opportunity to learn about his memory in general. The image agreed, and he wanted to tell her himself. The boy could only recall things he had consciously seen and heard in his past life, such as online videos he'd watched, school textbook content, colleagues' complaints, dull ads, overheard conversations, and so on. The comparison felt strange, like piecing together a torn document. Memory could try, but it still waited for exact instructions. The hero asked in disbelief if he could request such a thing. During training, the teacher asked the gentleman to watch his movements carefully, but the boy found it hard. He collapsed onto the grass, nearly exhausted, and the man said it was time to learn how to strengthen his body with magic. Converting magical power improves combat ability, but without proper skill it is almost useless. Reed had to picture his body as stronger. The idea was unclear, so his teacher explained that merely channeling mana through him would not work. He needed to sense the magic flowing through every muscle and across his whole body. At night, people were often told to feel rather than do. In other words, use muscles, not heads. Once the boy learned the trick, he would no longer run out of breath so quickly. Remembering the rule was important. The young man suddenly realized Rubens kept using the same tactic in their fights. The man never tired in long training sessions because he had endless stamina, while his student quickly ran out of energy, so Reed had no chance of winning. He threatened the teacher. Once he mastered body strengthening, he was sure he could defeat him. Rubens accepted his challenge, but first he had to learn how to distribute magical power. Then the man called him to an obstacle course. The hero felt his fatigue easing, and the man was pleased with how quickly he absorbed it. His training with Sandra probably helped, and the top warriors were amazing. Reed admired Rubens' abilities. If he had those talents, he would have become a true genius. The teacher encouraged him because success was just around the corner. The man was surprised the young man managed the training without strengthening his body. When the next stage began, the boy pushed himself as hard as he could without tiring, began running, and felt his magical power course through his body. After practicing openly without hiding the flow of magic, he mastered all the techniques, and the time came for a duel with Rubens. They fought fiercely, and the hero promised his teacher things would change, but Rubens refused to give up because he had not lost yet, and after Reed strengthened his body, training became more enjoyable, and he felt much less tired. They still differed in experience, height, and weight, but a win was possible, though not by a fair fight. A sudden will to win rose in the boy's chest, but as he hesitated, the weapon was knocked from his hand. A chance remained. He had to use the advantages of being a child to dodge the attack. The move failed. The man grabbed him from behind. The idea was good, but the execution was poor, so Reed lost. The teacher praised the student for not giving up after their swords clashed. His technique was effective against less skilled opponents. The young man demanded another round, but it was time to finish, so the man clarified that he was the one who had to finish. Next, Reed needed a special teacher, and they had grown too used to each other. A sudden realization hit the boy, and he grew afraid. He could hardly believe this was only the beginning after such grueling training. A man suddenly approached them and apologized for the delay because he had to finish the work. Rainer reached the training ground, and Reuben said they were finished. He was surprised to see his father. The father wanted to see his son's abilities in person, so he fought with everything he had. The hero did not expect that, after his teacher, his first opponent would be his own parent. Inside, a desire grew to test how much stronger Rainer was than his child. Arming himself again, the boy charged forward and struck first. The father quickly defended himself, admiring his child's strength at such a young age. Guessing the child had absorbed the enhancement, he even joked that he was beginning to feel afraid. Either way, the man was stronger. The boy found it harder to parry his blows and soon became completely exhausted. Rainer tried to irritate him, teasing him that his end had come too quickly. After that, he chose to attack, but his son found it harder and harder to bear. Reed lost his blade but still had his fists and planned to use them. His father was surprised that he still wanted to keep fighting after the sword's flood. The boy sank to his knees, growing more tired though he might have lasted longer against Reuben's. Rainer wanted to know how brave his son was, but the son did not fully understand. Rainer asked whether he knew what courage was. The son said it was an unwavering strength, which was a fair definition though it depends on one's understanding. Reed's father promised he would have the chance to feel it in real combat. Courage decided whether a man lived or died. Rainer pulled out a real saber to test his son. After checking the blade and finding it in good condition, he was startled when the boy asked why his father needed a real blade. The man chuckled and told him to think of it as training. He told Reed to listen carefully, stand straight and still, keep his eyes on him and watch his movements. At last it was time to begin, and the hero grew nervous. Reed felt a strange sense that his father's aura was intimidating him. Rainer swung his sword, aiming each blow straight at his son. Tears began to fall from the boy's eyes as he shut them in fear and fell back. The blade stopped and the father stared at it in silence. Later the man told him he really was the same age. He ordered Reed to stand and couldn't understand why Reed closed his eyes, since Reed had been told not to look away. The hero apologized for feeling the urge to kill for the first time and was afraid of a real sword. The boy was convinced his father would really kill him, even though he knew he would. The man reassured his son, saying everyone feels that way at first. Overcoming his fear would be necessary for him to gain courage. If he failed to do so, the boy would remain gripped by terror and would quickly perish. Living without fear was impossible, since it would lead to recklessness. Reed had to learn to control his senses, and Rainer had come specifically to teach him. Smiling, the man asked the boy if he would mind, and asked him again to teach him everything. Rubens warned that the gentleman's methods were unique, and that he could not help if anything went wrong, and the teacher wished him luck. This time Reed had to keep his eyes open and watch his father's movements closely as his father readied to swing again. When the blade came toward him, he closed his eyes again. A constant fear that the sword might strike him gripped the hero, his whole body shaking, but he knew it was necessary to improve his chances of surviving the battle. I kept telling myself not to close my eyes and to keep my eyes on the sword. Reed looked straight ahead and tracked the path of his father's blade. The weapon missed its target, stopping just a few touches from the hero's face with his gaze remaining fearless. Rainer was pleased to see his son already getting used to it. Then came Rubens, and the boy understood that this was not the end. The mandra will form a line, then Reed had to go past it to reach Rubens, while he himself would attack constantly. He added that this should not be a problem for the young man if he kept a close watch on his movements. After reading and understanding everything, he had no other choice. The teacher squeezed his fist tighter and quietly wished his student good luck. The hero stepped forward as his father attacked with his weapon. The boy kept moving, but the blade was so close he couldn't help feeling afraid. Thanks to the first lesson, his eyes were already adjusted, giving him a chance to win. The most important thing was to watch the sword. Suddenly the boy called out to the teacher with joy, held out his arms for a hug, and the man reached out his hand. The child jumped straight into Reuben's arms. Tears filled his eyes as he praised the young master for his success. Reed found his father's fencing ruthless, and before his training, he had only practiced with wooden swords. Rainer announced the session was over and said he would try to take part in every one. They ran this same training every time, The boy was stunned. Rubens told the boy what his father probably would not have said himself. He was actually glad to train together, since the man had long wanted to run an exercise. Reed understood everything and looked delighted. Still, the father couldn't show his feelings, as always. A voice called Reed's name. He turned to see a girl approaching with a woman. He asked Mel what was happening. The sister puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. She started scolding her dad for torturing her brother. The maid chose to explain everything herself. Mrs. Maldy wanted to see her brother, but training was underway, so she could only watch from the sidelines. She grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him along, saying the training was over. Later, the hero told his sister that his father had done it on purpose to toughen him up, so he should not have said such things. Despite her hatred, Mel understood and agreed. Sitting alone, the man suffered because his daughter hated him, and then the door opened and a girl walked in, frightening him. She went to explain herself to her father, since she felt no hatred toward him, and then asked for his forgiveness. The girl told the maid about her task, and the maid praised her. Rainer covered his eyes with his hand, still feeling hurt. Mel asked her brother to come back quickly, and he asked him to look after everything he had left for her. Rainer stood to one side and watched the children quietly. The boy decided to push his sister toward him. His daughter walked up to him and hugged him without warning. She asked him to come back quickly. His heart softened as he gathered the girl in his arms and promised one leg would be with them and the other would be there. Maldi was delighted by the promise. Sandra assured them Nenali could be left entirely in her care. The girl reminded Reed about magic, but he already knew everything. From the window, the woman watched as the preparations went on. Rubens said it was time to head to Renelute. While Reed rode in a carriage to the countryside, two monsters met in the forest of evil east of Renelute. A small blob of slime was about to slip into the hole under the tree. A massive evil snake monster crawled out from there. Slime had not expected to find a green snake there and was caught off guard, afraid of being eaten and killed. As the monster charged, a cat suddenly appeared and struck the reptile. Confused, the slime watched as the newly appeared beast destroyed the green snake. Then he began eating the flesh, which surprised her. Slime admired how cool this black cat looked. The creature wondered where such a monstrous slime had come from, and in that forest full of monsters, its species was the most common and at the bottom of the food chain. Usually a slime gathers magical power and splits to reproduce, but this specimen already had plenty of magic and for some reason did not split. A massive surge of power gave rise to something resembling emotions inside this body. After dragons and other monsters killed the slime's allies, one of the slimes grew afraid as it watched. Forced to live in constant fear of those stronger than her, she chose to separate from the others. The slime knew that staying in plain sight would get her eaten. The monster lived peacefully in hiding when its natural enemy, the green snake, found it. The black cat opened his mouth to ask why the slime was following him, but no answer came. When he turned, he saw it slipping away. The beast let her in, thinking that if left alone she would eat the slime, and the cat would not sleep properly. Thus began the strange cohabitation of the slime and the black cat. He let her live nearby, and if water was scarce, he simply drank it. Returning with food, the beast entered the hole and saw that the slime had brought order everywhere. The cat was surprised when she ate and swallowed the leftover food and bones. He gave her a leg to eat as a thank you for cleaning, and he hadn't brought the meat on purpose. The cat curled up, looking proud, watching his companion devour the food. Since black cats were bad at cleaning, he let her stay in the burrow even though it needed cleaning. Then the beast made sure his words were understood. From then on, the black cat hunted and the slime cleaned, and they lived that way. They could not speak the same language, but they understood each other. They began to wake the black cat, who was sleeping peacefully, because it was time to go hunting. He answered sleepily that he'd go when he got hungry. He soon realized, stunned, that it was slime, and she was surprised he could hear her voice. It was clearly magic. That slime was unusual. The cat had never heard of anything like it. She was surprised but pleased. All through their time living together, the slime had wanted to talk to him. The cat thought that this desire for her had been the trigger, and that was how she acquired the ability. The slime felt hopeful that one day it could take on a form like its neighbor. The cat liked the idea and dreamed the slime would one day become his sweet wife. Slime planned to pray for this every day. Slime and the black cat continued living together and got along so well that people said it was almost too much. With the forest so dangerous, he trolled me and led her to a safer place with fewer monsters. Slime asked who was in charge there, but her neighbor drove them all away. Finally, they arrived. The slime said it wanted to show him something and began to change. A moment later, the neighbor turned into a white cat. Frozen in shock, the black cat then asked how the result had turned out, since she had tried to create sulfur-colored fur but had only managed to make it white, and the beast considered this transformation perfect. Vinny said she was very sweet. Then the slime reminded him about the promise he had made. He remembered wanting her to be his wife if he transformed. Annoyed that he didn't remember, the cat flattened her ears. Suddenly he insisted he had not forgotten anything. The cat wondered whether it was his race or his looks that drew him to the creature. The slime had learned magic to take on his form and had worked so hard for him. Something touched the black cat, and he turned to his neighbor. Yes, the cat became his wife, and they lived their whole lives together, while tears welled in the slime's eyes. The cat asked again if he minded. Though clearly happy, she remained slim. He said confidently he would not repeat himself because he meant it, so she should agree. Slime sobbed harder, clinging to the cat as she confessed her feelings. In the forest of evil, a strange love grew between a slime and a cat. Soon they will meet a human child who senses a strange power, but that will be a completely different story. The Balsha family set out for Renelute with Reed, Rainer, Rubens, Diana, and the Knights. The Christie Merchant Guild traveled with them to establish trade relations, and they continued their journey safely. They reached a rest stop halfway through the journey. The boy grew seasick and felt ill. He had never imagined that riding in a wagon could be so painfully difficult. His father joked that this was his baptism by fire. Wanting to rest first, the boy entered the room and immediately fell onto the bed. The youth then searched his memory, answered immediately, and thought he would soon be called. Reed asked how the search for the memories he'd requested was going, and the reply was not encouraging. Nothing worthwhile had been found. He refused to give up, convinced there had to be some trace, like a name or a mention of the place they were heading. The prince of the country, Ressus, lived there, Renelute. The memory also said his in-game sprite had reappeared, and Reed wanted to see it. After they showed him how the prince looked, he thought the prince looked cool. Black hair, yellow eyes, and the classic dark elf tan made him stand out, so if they met him, they had to remember him. Reese's look suggested he might be at Sunder. Being the half-brother of such a creature was far from pleasant. The boy thanked his memory for helping him find him. A knock sounded at the door, and when the boy opened it, he saw an elf girl who apologized for interrupting his rest. Chris offered him lozenges she'd made from medicinal herbs, saying she knew about motion sickness because she often got it. The boy was glad the elf had worked so hard for him. He regarded her as a goddess, and the girl said she always carried them with her and hoped he would like them. Reed thanked her friend and promised to begin promoting her with all her might. Ahead, the Renelute outpost was already visible. One detail in Flutitiariale was unrelated to the plot, but sparked a lot of discussion among players. That detail turned out to be the Dark Elves. He saw East and West in one bottle, which made the hero even happier. The locals were a mix. Some wore kimonos, others wore Western-style clothes, like Japan after the Meiji Restoration. Reiner said it began after the Baralsto incident, when Renelute formed an alliance with Magnolia and began adopting its culture. It was a great chance to broaden his horizons. Eagerly, the boy asked his father to look. Rice fields were nearby. He chuckled, "You rarely see them in their country, but here they are common." After reading this, he even asked Chris to open trade routes to bring rice to the lands of Baldia. Then he spotted a huge castle, where those who opposed his marriage to the princess were already waiting for them. The boy braced himself and stayed on guard. After the ride, Lid stretched a little. The maids said they had arrived at the guest house where the hero would be staying and went to call the person in charge. A dark elf approached the boy and greeted him when he arrived in Renelute. Zach Riverton introduced himself as the manor's manager and the guest escort. Liner told the elf they were counting on him and informed Lid that the man had already helped them during the information exchange between the capital and Renelute, but Zach thought he was only a carrier pigeon. The manager told the guest the mansion was decorated in a Magnolia-inspired style and featured hot springs. Lid called the place a paradise. Arriving in his room, he lay down on the bed. He was relieved they had finally arrived. Diana came in dressed as a maid. The boy asked why she was dressed like that. The girl said that while they were in Renelute, she would be the master's bodyguard and servant, and told the boy not to hesitate to ask her for help. Reed said he would rely on her and asked whether a knight could really fight in such attire. The girl lifted her skirt to show the weapon at her hip and told her master not to worry. Diana kept revealing what she'd been hiding under her dress. Reed stopped her and said he'd figured it out. She asked if he was sure. The hero asked Diana why she carried so many hidden weapons. He didn't think knights used them, and she agreed. Men and women are built differently, she explained, and it's not always possible to reach the podium in a head-on fight, so Diana used concealed weapons to make up for the strength difference when facing men and was willing to do anything to join a knightly order. Reed asked whether she had gone to all this trouble for Rubens. Diana smiled, said that could be true, and remembered little Rubens. The girl suddenly protested that she was doing it mainly for herself, and Diana reminded him that while they were in Renelute, she would be his servant and asked him for a favor. Ordered to stay in the hero's room, the knight asked to be named heir. Reed, who thought she was still too noticeable, planned to get some sleep and told her to wake him if anything happened. That night someone entered the princess's room and said the Balsha family had arrived at the guest mansion. Escorting the princess, who was about to marry the Prince of Magnolia, meant clearing people away, and when she was sent to the groom's country, her personal guard would follow her. When her father suggested the task, the knight understood everything at once. She assumed her brothers, jealous of her skill, had complained. At times the knight felt resentful but did nothing. At 12, Asna Landmark's top priority was honing his skills to become the princess's sword. That woman scolded the girl for having the corner of her right hand too soft, and reminded her that as a princess, she had to understand her role. The girl apologized, but the woman kept shouting that a princess should be a role model for the people and that mistakes were unacceptable, while Asna tried to stop the teacher's outburst. The girl felt calling the princess that was too harsh. The woman said it was an order from His Majesty and Lady Eltia and asked if the knight had any problem with it. She told the girl they had wasted time because of her inattention. The princess apologized again. The lesson lasted from morning until evening. Besides teaching Renelute, she learned about the Magnolia estate's culture, its government, and the aristocratic lands. Asna found the rumors that the princess would marry into the empire were true. People had said Farah had lived like this long before Asna became her bodyguard. The more time Asna spent with Farah, the more she wanted to be her support. While Asna and Farah got ready for bed, the knight asked if the princess was comfortable, and she said she was used to it and thanked the bodyguard for his concern. Farah said she needed to be patient and keep trying, and the girl admitted she felt sad and started crying when her parents ignored her. Asna hugged the princess, while Fair remembered her mother's warning that her future fiancé would be the Prince of Magnolia and that she must not grow attached to the Margrave's son. Until now, her mother chose what she would wear and eat. Farah had no choice in life, but she wanted to decide for herself what to do about this man. Recalling their secret trip to the Baltic lands to experience Magnolia's atmosphere before the wedding, the princess was thrilled to see the world for the first time. She wondered if the boy who had helped her back then still lived in that country and hoped he was well and that they would meet someday. Reed examined the girl's painting. He described the work as beautiful and skillfully done. Zach asked if he liked the painting. The boy said it showed a very beautiful woman. Diana said the young gentleman was a romantic. Reed denied it and said he was just admiring her. The mansion manager said the painting showed Lady Elphia, Lord Elias' concubine. That woman was Princess Farah's mother, he added. The boy felt embarrassed at the idea of falling in love with his future wife's mother. Reed noted the daughter looked very much like her mother. Zach said he would appreciate his bride in that case. Reed asked whether Zach opposed his marriage to the princess. Zach said he had no right to object and only wanted Farah to be happy. Reed understood. In Renelute, house people had mixed feelings about Balsha. His father had told him that King Elias favored their union. Knowing he had to secure the manager's support first, the boy apologized for raising the issue. Reed said that if the princess looked like the portrait, it would be love at first sight, and he asked whether the man would support him. Zach Bood said he would be happy to support them. The hero captured the moment the manager delivered the message and thanked him. The man came forward and said his son was the true future. The father asked if the boy had done anything wrong, and the manager recounted how Reed had asked him to support his love affair with the princess, while also grasping the political situation in Renelute and his position. The father muttered that his son needed more self-control. Zach said he fully supported Reed. The steward was a blood relative of the king's concubine Elphia and the current head of House Riverton. They were also allies of Reynolds. Zach secretly led Renelute's intelligence agency and took orders directly from the king while remaining close to Elias. Lane was very encouraged that his son had the support of such a man. The men kept talking about the upcoming audience with the king and Norris's actions. A dark elf approached Rises and apologized for the intrusion. Norisa reported that everything was going according to plan. The boy thanked him for the news, and the man said he should be the one grateful, since his master had accepted his offer, and he could now be of use to him. Rises asked if their father had visited Lady Eltia's again. Norris muttered that the king had shown no concern for Lady Liesel's feelings. The man knew Recess and Pharaoh were free siblings, that the boy's mother, Queen Liesel, was related to Norris, and that because a secret agreement required the princess to marry Magnolia, Recess would be the only royal child remaining in Renelute. Norris seized the chance and whispered to him that King Elias loved only Lady Eltia, that she was to blame for Farah not seeing her brother, and that the king visited Queen Lisa only occasionally. Races began to notice his mother smiling sadly at times, and because he believed the king had treated a woman unfairly, he vowed never to be like his father. Norris stepped forward and promised to stay by his master's side. The man told the boy that if he followed his advice, he would become both a good king and a good man, and the advisor warned Ressus to be careful at the meeting. The boy said he already knew what to do and didn't need a reminder, determined to protect his sister, and afterward Norris went outside. A shadow slipped from a crack in the wall, and when the man asked about the prince's mood, it said the boy trusted Norris completely, so the prince would become suspicious. The man told his assistant to alert him if anything happened. The shadow vanished. Norris was pleased everything was going as planned. As Fira dressed, she said she felt uneasy. Asna said the outfit suited the princess perfectly. Fira thanked her and wondered whether her fiancé would like them too. The bodyguard said the gentleman would like it. Dropping to one knee, she said the princess looked especially beautiful today. Entering the room, the mother saw her daughter had finally put on the dress she had sent, and the daughter thanked her for the gift. Asna watched the mother and daughter and admitted she would not call them family. The elf said Farah had no right to disgrace Renelute, even before the Marquis's son. Her mother said that if the girl proved herself worthy they might discuss an alliance with the royal family. Farah replied that she understood everything, and her mother left the room saying she would go ahead. The girl exhaled. Asna asked if the princess was all right. Farah said the princess was used to this kind of treatment. The bodyguard added the young man was a groom candidate, so he shouldn't be too bad. Ferris called Asna kind and asked if she knew anything about their guest. The bodyguard only knew his name and said the groom was Reed Baldia. The girl went to the window and repeated Asna's words. Norris approached the king and asked to vet the potential groom, and Elias agreed, so Norris thanked his majesty, who warned him to proceed with caution and reminded him their guest was a nobleman of the empire. Elias planned to marry the queen to someone in the Imperial family, which would have given Renelute a real boost in prosperity, and the king muttered that no one had any hope for him anyway. Reed stood in front of the mirror examining his outfit, wondering if he looked too odd, while Diana asked how many times he'd checked his clothes that morning and compared him to a noble woman going to see a prince. The knight told Reed he was a very handsome boy, urged him to stand tall and be himself no matter his surroundings, and added that clothes were just a shell and the important thing was who wore them. Diana approached Reed and touched his face, and the hero blushed as she said that if he were a girl, he would be courted from all sides. Zack said they had to get going. Liner was already waiting outside. Reed shouted he was on his way. Walking down the stairs, the manager said he'd heard that Norris, an elderly dark elf and leader of the opposition, had fallen under Ressus's influence. Reed had not expected the man to get the information so quickly. The boy thanked him and asked what LTA thought. Zack guessed the woman wanted Farah to marry into the royal family. Her goals differed from Norris's. Zack did not know her true intentions. Reed thought it logical that a woman who did not know him would remain neutral. Raisis was his main problem. The hero knew that if the prince came under Norris's influence, he would turn hostile. Ask Zack Reed what he needed to do to get Reese to accept Farah's marriage, and the hero wanted the prince to support them. Reese's heart once. The man said the dark elf was literally blinded by Norris. Zack said the prince was intelligent and truly cared about the country, but he had accidentally fallen under the influence of an old elf. Rise's behavior went against the image of a prince, and he was mentally unstable. Zack asked Reed to break this influence. He said the hero could treat it as a request from the nobility, who cared about Renelute's future, and Reed could leave the rest to him. The hero didn't expect a formal commission from the nobles after his simple question. Reed realized this was his chance to make a name for himself. The boy promised to try his hardest. Zack was grateful the hero agreed. Reed asked why Racer becomes so attached to Norris. The manager apologized and said he was not at liberty to discuss it. When Reed came outside, Liner saw with displeasure that his son was making excuses. The boy apologized, and returned to the mansion. Reed was surprised the elf would not be joining them. The man said he was eager to see how the elf would perform. The hero was not sure what he meant. They rode by carriage to the palace to meet King Elias. Reed had expected a large castle, but found it was actually a strategic fort. When they arrived, Strata asked if this was Marquis Liner Bardia. The man said he was requesting an audience with His Majesty Elias. The guards said they had been expecting them and told them to leave their weapons. Liner said he, Reed, Diana and Rubens would go to the king and ordered the others to wait outside for them. Security asked guests to remove their shoes before entering the building. Staff escorted guests to the door and told them they were expected. The door opened. Guards and members of the royal family stood behind them, confident. Everyone watched the new arrivals closely. Some felt suspicion, interest, distrust, or curiosity. Liner summoned his son. They saw a single chair. Norris said they had been told that only the Marquis would attend the audience with the king, so a single chair had been set out. Liner asked Reed what he thought about it. Reed heard anger in Liner's voice, and the hero said he would simply stand beside Liner. Reed saw the way Norris looked at him and realized the elf did not like him, and when the knights grew furious, the master asked them to calm down. Liner sat in a chair and told his son to keep his head down until told to, then advised him to kneel and bow slightly, which Reed did. Everyone bowed when it was announced that Liner, Marquis of the Borderlands, had arrived from the Baldia domain of the Magnolia Empire. The doors opened, the royal family appeared, and His Majesty ordered everyone to raise their heads. Elias Gredad Leonor apologized for the pomp of the occasion. The Marquis said it was perfectly natural for the princess's fiancé. The king asked if his son was standing next to Leonor. Reed introduced himself, said he had heard his father talk about Princess Fiera, had come to greet the king, and was counting on the king's blessing. Elias remembered Reed was the same age as Rhyssus and asked Reed how old he was. Reed said he was 6. The king turned to his daughter and asked her to introduce herself. The girl said she was the princess of the kingdom of Renelute, daughter of King Elias Farah, and was so pleased to meet them that her ears began to tremble, but her mother reprimanded her, and she calmed down. Reed wondered what it meant. Lta Riverton, Farah's mother, introduced herself. Behind her stood Rhyssus, the princess's brother, and his mother, Liesel. The king introduced himself and said he wanted to keep good relations with the lord. Reed was asked how he felt about their proposal. The hero had not expected such a direct question. Rhyssus told his father he was being too playful and asked why he would pose that question to a child. Norris backed him up, and Reed realized the old elf did not want the boy to make an impression, so Reed decided to focus on the prince. About to do what Nares feared most, the hero declared that the alliance between Renelute and Houseball, the AM, must happen at any cost. Taken aback, the courtiers fell silent as the king asked for more, and the hero explained that Renaissance and the Baldian lands bordered each other so stronger ties would deter neighboring states, with Barelst as an example. The king said their empire already made them free and suggested that should be enough, and he doubted they could trust Magnolia. Reed explained that, from Barl's perspective, they may have seen their alliance with Magnolia as inefficient and believed marrying their neighbors, Baldia, could change things dramatically. Baldia was a margraviate that could raise an army on its own when threatened. Marriage placed him under the protection of his wife's allied state, letting him respond quickly without waiting for imperial orders. The nobles agreed. Reed announced Baldia would mobilize its forces if Renelute were attacked. If Balls trusted the alliance, it would strengthen their deterrent, something no dynastic marriage to the imperial house could achieve. Racists dismissed the lord as talking nonsense. The lord said they could act without marriage because they already had an alliance. Reed agreed and said he wanted to show how Barelst would react. He noted the alliance would not let Baldia join right away. The hero explained that using troops meant defense was the main priority. In Barelst, if the enemy attacked only their border, they could not respond without official orders. Reed asked his father if he was right. Liner told the king to ignore the child's words, but added that marriage's influence on moderation should not be dismissed. His Majesty asked us to clarify whether they thought this would be mainly aimed at Barelst. Reed said there were other arguments, but he would discuss them after the marriage. Elias laughed at the reply, called the Margrave's son very clever, and said he wouldn't sleep peacefully if the lord were their enemy, while Norris reminded the king that those were just the words of a child. The king noted that Liner also approved and encouraged his son to broaden his horizons. Elias told the Margrave it was a sensible and practical argument. Norris turned to the king and spoke. The king said words count only when backed by strength and valor, relying on both sword and wit. Elias extended his hand and asked to see the lord's fighting skills. Reed stepped onto the field as everyone waited for the fight. It made no sense that a meeting with Princess Fiera had turned into a duel at court. Diana handed the wooden sword to the master. The boy thanked her. The girl thought someone had tried to disgrace Reed, which explained why his equipment was so poorly prepared and that the same person had personally chosen his weapons. The hero was surprised the girl had even bothered, and Diana told the master not to spare anyone who was rude. While warming up, Reed saw the royal family arguing, which was why the duel hadn't started, and the king apologized to him, saying they had to change his opponent at once and that his son Rhyssus would now fight him, Renelute. Reed couldn't believe he had to fight the prince. Lubens and Diana clenched their fists and wished their master luck. The hero remembered Zack's words about breaking Reese's heart first, a request from the nobles who were concerned for Renelute's future, and Reed realized Zack had known all along. The dark elf asked why the boy was grinning. The hero said he had just remembered something funny, and Ressus muttered that he no longer liked his opponent. At the king's word, the duel between Mr. Reed and his son began. The rules were simple. The fight would end if either of them surrendered or if it became impossible to continue. The hero raised his hand and said he had one suggestion before the battle began, that only His Majesty Elias should decide when it would end. Reed noted that this was an important duel and did not want anyone to interfere. Norris, watching him, found the boy's behavior insolent. The king accepted the condition. Reese smiled and said the hero had already been defeated the moment he stepped onto their territory and advised him to return to Magnolia. Reed understood the princess's feelings about his domain, but he chose not to answer the child's words. Reese remembered that his opponent's mother was gravely ill and said the son of an ailing mother could hardly fight. The dark elf said Reed should stay near his mother since that suited him better. The hero held back his reaction to the provocation. At the Baldia estate, he refused to forgive Reese for what he said about his mother while she fought for her life. The dark elf asked if the boy had anything to say. The hero realized that Norris had provoked the prince. The duel began. Norris hoped the naive pause would work. The prince said if Reed surrendered now, they would spare him unnecessary pain. The hero told the elf not to trouble himself and asked whether his strength was only in words. Racist was indignant and reminded him that he had treated the human well. Note that the prince's kindness to him was only in words. Ressus raised his wooden sword and ran toward his opponent. Reaching the hero, the prince grabbed his robe and slung him over his shoulder. Everyone stood stunned. Reed pressed the sword to the prince's throat and asked if they were finished. The elf bristled and told Reed not to mock him. He squared his shoulders and resolved not to underestimate the human next time. Beckon drew his opponent toward him. The prince became angry and told him not to act like a hero. The boy noticed the dark elf hadn't even landed a punch. Rises lunged at Reed, but the hero blocked the blow with his sword. The elf claimed he would win if they crossed swords. The boy knew the prince planned to overpower him by force. Rill threw the sword back, causing Reese, who had been pressing hard against it, to lose his footing and fall as the sword dropped from the elf's hands. The hero pressed his weapon to the opponent's neck and said the prince's words did not match his actions. The spectators could not understand what it meant. The knights were glad for their master. Reese tried to speak but could not. Reed wanted the prince to see how huge the gap in their levels was. Reed told the elf to stand and reminded him he was the prince of Renelute. Reed asked whether Ressus would lose to the son of a sick mother, reminding him that he had set him up with a fake wooden sword and had put on the armor and uniform himself, and the hero asked whether the elf had any shame. He shouted at the prince to stand and said he would never forgive him otherwise. Ressus remained silent. The hero wanted to crush his pride. Seeing the elf refuse to rise, Reel said if the boy would not fight, he should simply admit defeat. The hero said that in that case, resist would be a pathetic, weak-willed coward. The lord admitted he saw in the prince a wise king like his father Elias. The elf stood and took up his sword. Calling after Reed, he shouted that he would definitely defeat him. The hero looked at the prince and noticed his gaze change. The prince said he accepted the challenge. The fight continued. Rises attacked Reed, who defended himself skillfully with his sword. Reed dodged and knocked the prince off his feet. The prince fell and rose. Farah watched the duel and could not believe her brother couldn't stand up to Reed, so no wonder she wanted to know what kind of training made someone so strong. Racist fell again. His sister did not understand why he kept fighting when he could have ended the fight at any moment. Asna assumed Reed did not care about winning or losing. The princess asked what she meant. The girl explained the master's aim was to display his skill, so he could not afford to lose on purpose. However, the boy had no intention of brutally defeating the prince. Reed could only force Rhesus to admit defeat or wait for His Majesty's decision. They were relieved to hear Reed wasn't acting out of malice. Ness said he was probably trying to teach the princess's brother a lesson. The bodyguard noticed Norris leave abruptly. Farah asked the girl what was wrong. Nis replied that the noble family had been acting suspiciously lately, and she planned to follow them. Ridu had lost count of how many times the prince dropped his sword during the duel, and tension rose as Rises refused to retreat despite falling repeatedly. The king was in no hurry to intervene, and the hero asked again whether the elf would accept defeat. Reese raised his sword and called the man a monster. Reed caught the blow with his weapon and told the prince the man was likely a demon. The hero threw the elf over his shoulder. Seeing that Ressus wasn't going to give in, Reed tried a different approach and asked the prince whether his words about the hero's mother were his own idea or suggested to him by someone else. Reed demanded an answer and asked if Norris had put him up to it. The prince said nothing, but the hero understood everything from his expression. The hero urged the races to admit defeat now, warning that otherwise everything would end badly. The prince shouted he would never admit defeat. Reed sighed and suddenly grasped his hand, admitting he had lost the duel to Ressus, who lay on the ground. The prince looked surprised. Once the duel ended, everyone gathered in the meeting room, and when Elias asked why Reed had announced his defeat, the boy replied that the king already knew the answer. The man realized Reese had been completely defeated. Although his son had fought honorably, the boy's stubbornness kept him from accepting defeat. The king asked if his opponent was suggesting he admit defeat. Reese replied that his father was right. He admitted he continued fighting only out of pride and felt Reed was fighting half-heartedly. Elias, however, believed his son was smarter. Lisa backed him, reminding Elias that Rises had said he wanted to fight before the battle. Reed realized this was what the queen had argued with the king about. The king asked why the lord had entered the battle that way, since he could have easily taken out Reese's. The hero knew he would have to explain it to the king himself. Reed asked everyone to leave, even his father. He wanted to repeat the conversation in private with the royal family, and Liner, seeing his son had a plan, told him to finish speaking. After everyone left, Elias asked why they had acted that way. Reed said Rhesus had told him to go back to Magnolia before the fight. For a prince of a certain country, especially at a diplomatic reception, that was an extremely careless act. Reed said that if that had been all it took, he could not ignore Reese's next words. Liesel asked what more her son had said. Reed said the prince had called him the son of a sick mother. He was a gentleman who couldn't handle a sword. The hero said the words were unforgivable, and as a member of the Bardia family, he would not tolerate that treatment. The queen began to cry, and Elias asked her son if it was true. Reese remained silent. The man called it a disgrace. The king remembered teaching the prince that everyone must take responsibility for their words and actions, noting that Reese had spoken with a nobleman from an allied state who was engaged to his sister, and the man asked how his son could say such things. Reed decided clearing the hall was pointless. Reese said nothing. Elias stood, took the sword, and said that if his son could not even answer him, he had no use for him. Reese apologized, and his father asked why his son had acted so foolishly. The prince said marrying his little sister to a common nobleman was unwise, and that she should marry into the Imperial family to secure Renelute's future. Elias saw his son was under Norris's influence, and said Rasses wanted to send Farah to a den of intrigue worse than Renelute, to a world where she would be nothing more than a flunky. The boy trembled when he realized his mistake. He believed a marriage with the Empire would bring Pharaoh happiness. The king told the prince not to repeat words he had heard from someone else. Reese began to cry and scream. After calming down, the elf realized his mistake and turned to Lord Reed and knelt before him. He bowed low before the hero and admitted his mistake. Ressus admitted he had let others' words influence him and had said things he had no right to. The principal became energized. Reed said it was no longer necessary. Elias reminded them that his apology alone was not enough and that he also had to apologize on behalf of the state. Races said he understood. The prince told Reed he had no doubt his master could make his sister happy, and the boy asked him to take care of the girl. The king raised his sword. Reese apologized to his father for the trouble he had caused, and the queen rushed to stop her husband. Reed, however, compared the scene to historical dramas and thought it was about to be complete seppuku. Liesel clutched her husband's leg, pleading for mercy for the child who had only stumbled. Reeses declared that he should be punished for what he had done. The prince made a final request to the king to care for his mother and love her as he loved Lady Eltia. Elias said he had never once favored any of his beloved wives and added that his son had simply been manipulated. Reed saw the king about to strike Recess with his sword. Reed wanted to stop him. Reed shielded Races from the sword, determined to uphold the king. The boy said he did not want his opponent to face that punishment in battle. The hero explained that the Or had fought with the principal only to make him repent, and reminded him that he and his sister were going to marry, so he would not want to lose Recess over something like that. Reed said only those in the room knew, so he asked his father to leave. The king paused to think, and the hero noticed the king's doubt. The gentleman said he had several requests in exchange for leaving everything unscathed, and asked only that they listen to them and understand the decision. Elias sheathed his sword and told Reed to speak. Reed thought the king had been waiting for Liner's son to speak. Reed asked His Majesty to become a patron of Christie's Trading Company because new businesses faced prejudice in Renero, and he wanted the king's support. Elias agreed and asked Reed to bring a representative next time. The boy thanked him and could finally give Christie some good news. The second request asked that Reed and Ferris's engagement be recognized. His Majesty asked whether the price was acceptable. The hero said he would consider the marriage sealed if the royal family approved. Reed asked to speak briefly with the king. Approaching his majesty, he whispered in his ear. Elias said he had no objections and approved the marriage to his daughter, but warned them it must not be announced and asked them to keep it between them, and Reed said he would tell his father himself. The final condition required sparing Prince Ressus from punishment. The king asked what Reed planned. Reed said he did not want to lose someone who could become his brother and understood that the prince had fallen under a bad influence. The boy asked what the racist himself thought of it. The elf said he was deeply moved by the generous pardon and truly grateful. The prince promised to seize the opportunity. The king said that with the darkness gone his son would cope, declared the matter closed, and warned him not to tell anyone. Watching the hero shake Elias' hand, Rices realized he could never match Lord Reed in wisdom, skill, or greatness as a man. Leaving the hall, the boy met his father. He believed that with the duel over, everything was finally settled. Farah and Asna walked toward them. Reed couldn't understand why she was there. The girls approached the lord, and the princess asked him to be her bodyguard. Norris left the field as Reed fought Ressus, unable to accept that the prince, an older skilled swordsman, was losing to the Margrave's son, and sure it would have been different if the wooden sword hadn't hit the maid. Seeing the weapon, Diana asked whether they thought it acceptable to show such disrespect to her master, and did not ask what she was talking about, since her accusations could also be considered rude. The knight examined the wooden sword. She grabbed it and snapped it in half, which the dark elf had not expected. She pointed out that even a weak soldier like her could easily break her weapon, and asked whether Norris considered that kind of combat training insulting. Assuming it was a mistake, the man said he'd bring another sword, and Diana asked him to take her to the vault so she could choose the master's weapon herself. Annoyed by the interference, Norris stepped into the yard, went to the fence, and called his assistant to come out. A shadow fell on the fence. She asked why he had called her here. Norris apologized, said he was in a difficult spot, and asked the shadow if it had any good advice. Surprised the elf couldn't handle such a simple task, the assistant suggested that he had overestimated Norris. The man protested, saying the Margrave's son was a monster. The shadow offered him some advice. She said the nobles, whether they supported the marriage or were neutral, would be unhappy to see the prince beaten again and again. Since the king would not stop the fights, the prince would not surrender and would be tortured for much longer. Shadow added that Norris should spread rumors after the duel. Fairy came to Reed and asked him to duel Asna, her bodyguard. The king told his daughter dueling at court was not a sport. The girl asked to be heard, saying evil rumors were spreading through the hall and that she wanted to dispel them with a new battle, and His Majesty said he would tell her more. Ferris said they were tracking a nobleman, but lost him along the way. She and Asno overheard people saying the Margrave's son had been torturing the prince and taking cruel, merciless pleasure in it. Courtiers believed Reed was deliberately showing his power and planned to take the princess hostage after the marriage. The people wanted her to marry into the Imperial family. Asna and Farah heard these rumors. The princess realized their opponents had already started to act. If things kept going the same way, they could eventually reach their goal. Asna reported that Norris was leading the chaos. This posed a grave problem for Queen Liesel and Ressus. The king said he understood and asked how the fight between Asna and Reed was relevant, and Farah said they had planned it together. The princess wanted to gather the nobility again to explain why the fight with the races had gone badly and to dispel the rumors, and the bodyguard wanted to stage a real duel with Reed to reassure doubters and prove the prince was not lying or exaggerating his strength. Farah said this would protect both their honors and keep anyone from being disgraced. Reed blamed the patron for arranging the whole thing, and the king, however, saw in his daughter the same insight her mother had. After considering it, the king agreed to follow the princess's plan and confirmed that Asna and Reed were on board. Ressus spoke first, admitting the battle had dragged on because of his stubbornness and saying the lord was innocent, but the nobles were not entirely satisfied. Elias knew his son's performance had not convinced anyone, so he announced a second battle between Reed and Ferris's bodyguard, Asna. Norris was pleased with the choice and certain the lord would be disgraced this time. The king ordered the combatants to prepare. Asna chose a wooden sword. It was her chance to see Reed's strength firsthand. She hadn't been this eager for a duel in a long time. Norris entered the warehouse and greeted the bodyguard. He tried to introduce himself, but the woman cut him off and said she knew him. Asna asked what he was doing there. The old elf said he had a proposition for the girl and wanted her help. Asna understood Norris had come to lure her to his side and asked what he wanted, and the man said the bodyguard should beat Reed and force him to abandon the marriage. Asna tried to ignore him, but Norris said he was friends with her brothers and could arrange a reconciliation, and secure her release from service in the trial so she could finally return to the landmark family. The bodyguard firmly told the old elf not to delude himself. She did not regret her choice and had no intention of taking his deal. Norris was not pleased. As Null left, the man asked if she was prepared to give up her life or never return. The girl pressed her sword to Nora's throat, said she was proud to serve the princess, and warned that any more words would be an insult to Farah. Norris left the warehouse annoyed. On the battlefield, Asna smiled and said she would be glad to watch them duel. Reed agreed.